The door slammed shut behind her like a prison gate. Clara Whitmore stood alone in the grand marble hall of Wolfe Manor, her wedding dress still pinned tight around her ribs, and realized with brutal clarity that she had not married a man. She had been sold to a fortress. Somewhere in the East Wing, her new husband was already back at his desk, signing documents as if the ceremony had been just another appointment. No kiss, no words, just a signature and a turned back. Outside, her father's carriage disappeared down the tree-lined drive, taking with it the last remnants of her old life and leaving her here, in this cold palace of silence and stone, with a stranger who looked at her like she was a debt he'd been forced to settle. This is the story of how a discarded bride became the most dangerous woman in the empire. If you're watching from London, Tokyo, New York, or anywhere else, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and buckle up, because what's coming next is a war fought in whispers, power plays, and one woman's refusal to disappear. The wedding had been beautiful in the way funerals sometimes are. Flowers everywhere, everyone dressed in their finest, and absolutely no joy in the room. Clara had walked down the aisle of St. Catherine's Chapel alone. Her father had offered his arm, but she'd refused it. If she was going to be sold, she wouldn't pretend it was anything else. The organ music swelled, echoing off marble columns that had witnessed 3 centuries of vows, and she kept her eyes forward, locked on the man waiting at the altar. Darian Wolfe. Even his name sounded like a threat. He stood perfectly still, hands clasped behind his back, watching her approach with the expression of someone inspecting a horse at auction. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back from a face that might have been handsome if it ever softened. It didn't. His eyes were gray, cold as winter slate, and when they met hers, there was no warmth, no curiosity, just assessment. She'd seen him 3 times before the wedding. Once at the signing of the marriage contract, where he'd barely glanced at her while his lawyers and her father hammered out the terms. Once at a stilted dinner where he'd answered her questions and clipped monosyllables before excusing himself to handle estate business. And once, briefly, at the final dress fitting where he'd appeared in the doorway, nodded to confirm she existed, and left. Now here she was, standing beside him in front of 200 witnesses, about to pledge her life to a stranger who couldn't even fake a smile for the cameras. "Do you, Clara Elizabeth Whitmore, take this man?" She said yes before the vicar finished. Might as well get it over with. Darian's response was equally mechanical. The ring slid onto her finger, platinum, impersonal, sized perfectly because someone on his staff had managed that detail. When the vicar pronounced them married, Darian turned to her with the efficient precision of a soldier executing a drill. The kiss lasted approximately 2 seconds. His lips touched hers with all the passion of a business handshake, and then he stepped back, already turning toward the receiving line. "Smile," he said quietly. "They're watching." She smiled. She'd gotten good at that. The reception was held at Ashford House, the Whitmore family estate that would be sold within the month to pay her father's gambling debts. That was the deal, after all. Darian had purchased those debts along with Clara herself, a package arrangement. In exchange for settling the Whitmore family's catastrophic finances, he got a wife with an old name and good bloodlines to add a veneer of respectability to his new money fortune. Everyone pretended it was a love match. "Such a beautiful bride," Lady Pemberton cooed, gripping Clara's hand with bony fingers. "And the Duke of Wolfe, my dear, you've done extraordinarily well. His industrial holdings alone are none of your concern, Margaret," said Eleanor Whitmore, Clara's mother, sweeping in with a champagne flute and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "But yes, very advantageous for everyone." Clara stood between them like a piece of furniture being appraised and said nothing. What was there to say? "Yes, mother, you married me off to clear father's debts. Yes, Lady Pemberton, my husband owns half the steel mills in the Northern Territories and treats his wife with the same warmth he shows his quarterly reports." Across the ballroom, Darian was surrounded by men in dark suits, investors, political allies, the kind of people who moved money and power around like chess pieces. He looked completely at ease there, natural. She watched him nod at something Lord Harrington said, his expression unreadable, and wondered if he felt anything at all, or if that part of him had been surgically removed at some point. "You should go to him," her mother said, following her gaze. A wife belongs at her husband's side. A wife, Clara said quietly, belongs wherever her husband puts her, and he's made it clear that's not next to him. Eleanor's smile tightened. Don't be dramatic. This is simply how these arrangements work. You'll adjust. But her mother's eyes held something else. Relief, maybe, or guilt wearing the mask of pragmatism. Either way, Clara was done with this conversation. She excused herself and walked out onto the terrace, where the night air hit her like cold water, and she could finally breathe. The garden stretched out below, dark and formal, hedges trimmed into geometric precision. Everything in Darian's world was like that, she was learning. Controlled, ordered, no room for anything wild or unexpected or human. Running away already? She turned. A woman stood in the doorway, backlit by the ballroom chandeliers, striking in a way that made Clara immediately wary. Tall, with copper-red hair swept up in an elaborate style, wearing a dress that was just expensive enough to signal wealth, but not quite expensive enough to signal old money. She held a champagne flute loosely, like she'd been to 1,000 of these parties, and found them all equally boring. Just needed air, Clara said. I don't blame you. The woman stepped out onto the terrace, letting the door close behind her. These things are suffocating. I'm Vivian, by the way. Vivian Cross, friend of the groom. Something in the way she said friend made Clara's spine straighten. Clara Wolfe, she said, testing out the new name. It felt foreign in her mouth. Apparently. Vivian laughed, bright, genuine, completely at odds with the careful smiles inside. Apparently. I like that. She moved to the balustrade, looking out over the gardens. So, how are you finding married life so far? About 3 hours in? Illuminating. That's a polite way of saying terrible. Vivian turned, studying her with sharp green eyes. Let me guess. He's already back to work, barely spoke to you at the reception, kissed you like he was signing a contract. Clara said nothing, which was answer enough. That's Darian, Vivian said, not unkindly. Duty above all else. Emotion is weakness. The Wolfe family motto might as well be feel nothing, accomplish everything. She paused. You're going to have a hell of a time with him. You seem to know him well. We've known each other since we were children. Our families, well, let's just say we're old friends. Another pause, weighted with something Clara couldn't quite identify. I thought about warning you, actually, before the wedding, but you seemed determined, and I figured you knew what you were getting into. Did I have a choice? Vivian's expression shifted, sympathy mixed with something harder. No, I suppose you didn't. None of us really do in the end. We just pretend we're making decisions instead of following the script we've been handed. Inside, someone called for a toast. Through the glass, Clara could see her father standing, raising his glass, his face flushed with champagne in relief. The man who had gambled away 3 generations of Whitmore wealth and solved the problem by selling his daughter. I should go back in, Clara said. Should you? Vivian tilted her head. Or could you stay out here, where at least the air is honest? But Clara was already moving, because Vivian was right about one thing. They were all following scripts. And her script said the bride didn't hide on terraces during her own wedding reception, no matter how much she wanted to. When she stepped back inside, Darian's eyes found her immediately across the room. He didn't smile, didn't gesture for her to join him, just looked at her for a long moment, then returned to his conversation as if she'd never existed. Welcome to marriage. The carriage ride to Wolfe Manor took 2 hours. Clara spent most of it looking out the window at darkness, punctuated by the occasional lamppost. Darian sat across from her, reading documents by the light of a small interior lamp, making notes in the margins with a silver pen. He hadn't said a word since they'd left Ashford House. Are you always this talkative? She finally asked. He looked up, mildly surprised that she'd spoken. I'm working. On our wedding night. The Brennan contract needs to be finalized by Monday. The work doesn't stop because I got married. How romantic. His jaw tightened slightly, the first real reaction she'd gotten from him all day. Romance wasn't part of the agreement, Miss Whitmore. Mrs. Wolfe, she corrected. If we're going to be coldly transactional about this, at least use the right name. He studied her for a moment, and she couldn't tell if he was annoyed or impressed. Maybe both. Fine, Mrs. Wolf. Romance wasn't part of the agreement. We both know why we're here. Your family needed financial rescue. I needed a wife with the right pedigree to satisfy certain social requirements. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. You make it sound like a business merger. It is a business merger. He set down his papers, giving her his full attention for the first time since the ceremony. I don't believe in pretending otherwise. You seem intelligent enough to appreciate honesty over comfortable lies. So here's the truth. I don't have time for the kind of marriage where we pretend to be in love and play house. I need someone who can manage the social obligations of a duchess, host when necessary, and otherwise stay out of my way while I run the business. In exchange, you get financial security, social position, and freedom to do whatever you want within the bounds of propriety. It's a better deal than most marriages in our circle. And if I want more than that? More what? More than being decorative furniture in your life. He leaned back, regarding her with those cold gray eyes. Then you'll be disappointed. I can give you comfort, protection, and respect. I cannot give you romance or companionship. Those require time and emotional investment I don't have. The carriage hit a bump, jostling them both. Outside, through the window, Clara caught her first glimpse of Wolf Manor, a massive silhouette against the night sky, all stone towers and dark windows. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Does it have a dungeon? She asked. What? Your house. It looks like the kind of place that should have a dungeon. For a moment she thought she saw the corner of his mouth twitch, almost a smile. But then it was gone, if it had ever been there at all. No dungeon, he said. Just 43 rooms, most of which you'll never see. I've arranged for the east wing to be yours. Bedroom, sitting room, private study. Mrs. Vale, the head housekeeper, will show you around tomorrow. If you need anything, ask her. And where will you be? In the west wing. My rooms are there. He paused. We'll maintain separate quarters. It's more practical. Practical, she repeated. Of course. The carriage rolled to a stop in front of massive oak doors. A line of servants stood waiting, perfectly arranged like chess pieces, butler, housekeeper, footman, maids, all in crisp uniforms, all wearing the same carefully neutral expression. Darian stepped out first, then offered his hand to help her down. It was the most husbandly thing he'd done all day, and it was purely for show. The moment her feet touched the gravel drive, he released her and turned to the waiting staff. Mrs. Wolf, he said formally, gesturing to an older woman in black bombazine with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. This is Mrs. Vale. She runs the household. Anything you need, she'll arrange it. Mrs. Vale curtsied, but her eyes were calculating as they swept over Clara, measuring, judging. Welcome to Wolf Manor, madam. I trust you'll find everything satisfactory. I'm sure I will, Clara said, because what else was there to say? Darian was already moving toward the doors. Mrs. Vale will show you to your rooms. I have work to finish. I'll see you tomorrow at breakfast, 8 o'clock sharp. And just like that, he was gone, disappearing into the dark interior of the manor with the butler trailing behind him like a shadow. Clara stood in the gravel drive, still in her wedding dress, surrounded by servants who looked at her like she was a curiosity at best and an inconvenience at worst, and thought, this is my life now. Mrs. Vale cleared her throat delicately. If you'll follow me, madam. The interior of Wolf Manor was exactly as cold and impressive as the exterior promised. Marble floors, dark wood paneling, portraits of stern-faced ancestors glaring down from the walls. Everything was immaculate, perfectly maintained, and utterly devoid of warmth. It felt more like a museum than a home. The manor has been in the Wolf family for 4 generations, Mrs. Vale said as they climbed a sweeping staircase. His Grace's great-grandfather built it after making his fortune in shipping. The family has since expanded into steel, railways, and manufacturing. We maintain a staff of 32, including groundskeepers and stable hands. That's quite a lot of people. The Duke requires efficiency, madam. Everything runs on schedule. Breakfast at 8, as you heard. Lunch at 1, dinner at 7. His Grace keeps to a strict timetable. They reached the second floor and turned down a long corridor lined with more portraits. Clara caught glimpses of drawing rooms and libraries through open doors, all perfectly arranged, all utterly silent. "This is the East Wing," Mrs. Vale said, stopping in front of a heavy wooden door. "Your quarters, madam." She pushed open the door to reveal a suite that was undeniably beautiful and completely impersonal. The bedroom was done in pale blues and silvers, with a four-poster bed that could sleep 4 people comfortably, tall windows overlooking the gardens, and furniture that looked expensive and uncomfortable. A door led to a dressing room already filled with her trousseau. Another door led to a sitting room with a fireplace and bookshelves and absolutely no personal touches anywhere. "Your lady's maid, Annie, will help you prepare for bed," Mrs. Vale said. "If you need anything, pull the bell cord. Breakfast will be served in the morning room at 8. I'll have Annie wake you at 7. "Where are the Duke's rooms?" Mrs. Vale's expression didn't change. "The West Wing, madam, across the manor." As far from me as possible, Clara thought. Out loud she said, "Thank you, Mrs. Vale. That will be all." The housekeeper curtsied and left, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded unnervingly like a lock engaging. Clara stood in the middle of her beautiful, cold bedroom and slowly unpinned her veil. Her reflection stared back at her from a full-length mirror. A young woman in an elaborate white dress, dark hair falling loose around her shoulders, eyes that looked older than they had this morning. "Well," she said to her reflection, "you wanted security, you got it." A soft knock at the dressing room door announced Annie, a girl about Clara's age with nervous hands and a bob that suggested she'd been told to be invisible. She helped Clara out of the wedding dress with efficient, practiced movements, lacing her into a nightgown that was probably worth more than Annie made in a year. "Will there be anything else, madam?" Annie asked, eyes downcast. "Does he ever smile?" Clara asked suddenly. "The Duke, I mean. Have you ever seen him smile?" Annie's eyes went wide with something like panic. It's not my place to say, madam." "That's a no, then." "Please, madam." "I couldn't possibly—" Clara waved her off. "Never mind, you can go." Annie fled like the room was on fire. Alone finally, Clara moved to the window and looked out at the dark gardens below. Somewhere in the West Wing, Darian was probably still working, reviewing contracts or balance sheets or whatever it was that occupied his every waking moment. She thought about what he'd said in the carriage. "I can give you comfort, protection, and respect. I cannot give you romance or companionship." At least he was honest. That was something, wasn't it? Better than pretty lies about love and partnership while treating her like property behind closed doors. But standing here in this beautiful prison of a room, Clara couldn't help feeling like she'd traded one cage for another. At Ashford House, she'd been trapped by her father's debts and her family's expectations. Here, she was trapped by a marriage contract and a husband who'd made it clear she was just another acquisition in his vast portfolio of assets. Outside, storm clouds were gathering. She could see them in the moonlight, dark masses rolling in from the north. By morning, there would be rain. Clara pressed her palm against the cold window glass and made herself a promise. She would not disappear into these walls. She would not become just another portrait in the gallery, another silent ghost haunting these perfect empty rooms. She didn't know how yet, but she would find a way to survive this. She had to. Breakfast at 8 meant breakfast at 8. Clara arrived at 8:03 and found Darian already seated at the head of a table that could comfortably seat 20, reading the morning paper with his coffee. He glanced up at her entrance, noted the time with a flicker of his eyes toward the ornate clock on the mantel, and returned to his paper without comment. The message was clear. Tardiness was noted. She took the seat that had been set for her, halfway down the table, far enough away that conversation would require raising voices. Of course. A footman appeared at her elbow with coffee. Another offered a silver tray of breakfast options. Clara took toast and eggs she wasn't hungry for and tried to figure out the rules of this new game. "Did you sleep well?" Darian asked from behind his paper. It was such a normal question, so utterly divorced from the reality of their situation, that she almost laughed. "Wonderfully, thank you. The bed is very comfortable." "Good." Silence stretched out between them, broken only by the rustle of newsprint and the quiet clink of silverware. Rain lashed against the tall windows, confirming the storm she'd seen building last night. "I'll be in London for the next week," Darian said abruptly, folding his paper. Business with Parliament regarding the new railway contracts. Mrs. Vale will help you settle in here. If you need anything, ask her, yes. You mentioned, his eyes narrowed slightly. Is there a problem? Not at all. Just confirming I understand the arrangement. You'll be gone most of the time. I'll manage the household with Mrs. Vale, and we'll maintain this very cordial distance while pretending to the world that we're a happily married couple. That's not... He stopped, started again. I told you what this marriage would be. I was clear about the terms. You were very clear. Then why do you sound angry? I'm not angry. Clara set down her coffee cup with precise care. I'm adjusting. There's a difference. Darian studied her for a long moment, and she got the sense he was trying to solve a problem he hadn't expected to encounter. Finally, he stood, collecting his papers. I'm leaving within the hour. I'll return next Sunday. If any issues arise with the estate, send word through Matthews. Your secretary. My right hand, he'll know where to find me. And if I need to find you, you won't. The certainty in his voice should have stung, but Clara was getting numb to it. Of course, silly question. He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. This doesn't have to be difficult, Clara. If you work with the arrangement instead of fighting it, you'll find life here quite pleasant. Pleasant, she repeated, like a well-run hotel. Exactly. He left before she could decide if he was serious or if that had been the world's driest joke. Mrs. Vale appeared in the doorway approximately 30 seconds later, as if she'd been waiting for Darian to leave. His Grace has departed for London, madam. Shall I give you the tour of the manor this morning? Clara looked at her breakfast, barely touched, then at the rain streaming down the windows, then at Mrs. Vale's expectant face. Yes, she said, standing. Let's see what I've gotten myself into. The tour took 3 hours. 43 rooms, Mrs. Vale had said, and she apparently meant to show Clara every single one. Drawing rooms and parlors and libraries and studies and music rooms and ballrooms and dining rooms and breakfast rooms and sitting rooms that all started to blur together in Clara's mind. All beautifully appointed, all perfectly maintained, all completely, utterly lifeless. The Duke prefers things kept just so, Mrs. Vale explained as they walked through yet another drawing room, this one decorated in deep burgundy and gold. Everything has its place. The staff knows not to move or change anything without explicit permission. Has he ever given permission to change anything? Mrs. Vale's lips thinned. Not in the 5 years I've been housekeeper, madam. They moved through the portrait gallery, where 4 generations of Wolfes stared down with varying degrees of disapproval. Great-grandfather Wolfe, who'd built the fortune. Grandfather Wolfe, who'd doubled it. Father Wolfe, who'd died young in a riding accident, leaving a teenage Darian to inherit everything. His Grace was 17 when his father passed, Mrs. Vale said, noting Clara's attention on that particular portrait. He took control of the family business immediately. Some said he was too young, but he proved them wrong. Tripled the family holdings in 10 years. Clara studied the portrait of Darian's father, a man who looked nothing like his son, with warm brown eyes and a smile that actually reached them. What was he like? The late Duke? Very different from the current Duke, madam. Mrs. Vale's voice held something careful in it. He enjoyed entertaining, had friends constantly visiting. The house was quite lively when he was alive. And after? His Grace prefers quiet. The diplomatic answer to a question Clara was starting to understand ran deeper than simple preference. Darian had shut down this entire mansion like someone closing off rooms in a house after a death, which she supposed was exactly what had happened. They finished the tour in the library, a massive room that took up 2 stories of the North Tower, with floor-to-ceiling shelves and rolling ladders, and tall windows that looked out over the rain-soaked grounds. You're welcome to use any of the rooms, of course, Mrs. Vale said, though His Grace prefers the library kept in order. If you borrow books, please return them to their proper places. Does he use this room often? Not in my memory, madam. His father was the reader. His Grace prefers to work in his study. Of course he did. After Mrs. Vale left, Clara wandered the library alone, running her fingers along leather spines, breathing in the smell of old paper and furniture polish. This room, at least, felt lived in. Real. Someone had loved these books once, even if that someone was long dead. She pulled down a volume at random, poetry, Tennyson, and opened it to find neat annotations in the margins. A reader's notes, observations, underlined passages. The handwriting was strong and clear, nothing like Darian's sharp, efficient script. His father's then. The man who'd smiled and entertained and filled this house with life, before an accident stole him away and left his teenage son to build walls around everything soft. Clara sat in a wing-back chair by the window and read, while rain hammered the glass, and somewhere in London, her husband signed contracts and pretended she didn't exist. The week passed slowly. Darian didn't write, didn't send word. Might as well have vanished off the face of the earth for all the presence he maintained in his own house. Clara learned the rhythms of Wolf Manor quickly because there wasn't much to learn. Breakfast at 8, even though she ate alone now. Lunch at 1, tea at 4, dinner at 7. The staff moved through the house like clockwork, maintaining perfect order, speaking in whispers, treating her with polite deference that never quite became warmth. She was an intruder here, she realized, a disruption in a system that had been running smoothly without her. The staff didn't know what to do with a duchess who actually wanted to be involved instead of ornamental. On the third day, she asked Mrs. Vale about the household accounts. "The accounts, madam." Mrs. Vale looked like she'd asked to inspect the plumbing. "Yes, I'd like to understand how the household runs. Budget, expenses, staff wages. The usual things a wife should know about her home." "His Grace handles all financial matters personally, madam. There's no need for you to concern yourself." "I'm not concerned. I'm interested. Surely there's no harm in my understanding how this house operates." Mrs. Vale's expression suggested there was quite a lot of harm, actually, but she couldn't quite articulate what. "I'll speak to Mr. Matthews about it, madam." "You do that." The accounts never materialized. On the fifth day, Clara suggested rearranging the morning room to take better advantage of the light. Mrs. Vale looked genuinely horrified. "His Grace prefers things kept as they are, madam. His Grace is in London and won't notice if we move a few chairs. Nevertheless, madam, I couldn't possibly authorize such a change without his approval." So the chairs stayed exactly where they were, in their perfectly useless arrangement, and Clara added furniture placement to the growing list of things she apparently had no authority over in her own home. By the sixth day, she'd explored every accessible room in the manor, read 11 books from the library, taken long walks through the grounds despite the persistent rain, and confirmed what she'd suspected from the beginning. This was a beautiful cage, and she was just another thing Darian had acquired and filed away. That evening, sitting alone in the vast dining room while a footman served her dinner for one, Clara made a decision. She couldn't change Darian, couldn't force him to be present or engaged or remotely interested in having an actual wife instead of a decorative accessory. But she could find a way to exist in this world that didn't involve slowly disappearing into the wallpaper. She just had to figure out how. The answer came on Sunday, when Darian returned. She was in the library when she heard the commotion downstairs, carriage wheels on gravel, doors opening, the low murmur of servants greeting their master. She marked her page and waited, curious if he'd seek her out or simply vanish into his study like he'd never left. 20 minutes later, he appeared in the library doorway, still in his traveling coat, looking exhausted in a way that somehow made him more human. "You're reading," he observed. "You're back. Obviously." He moved into the room, loosening his collar. "How was your week?" "Extraordinarily eventful. I moved a chair in the morning room and nearly caused a staff mutiny." His expression didn't change. "Mrs. Vale mentioned you'd been making suggestions. Is that what she called them?" "She called them concerning deviations from established protocol. I'm translating." Clara closed her book. "And your opinion?" "My opinion is that you're bored." Perceptive. He crossed to the sideboard and poured himself a whiskey. Neat. Drank half of it in one swallow. "What do you want, Clara?" Honest answer. "Something to do besides be decorative. Such as?" "I don't know. Something useful. Mrs. Vale won't let me near the household accounts. The staff acts like I'm made of glass, and apparently I'm not allowed to move furniture without written permission from you." Darian was quiet for a moment, studying his whiskey. "You want to manage the household? I want to understand it, at minimum. Why? Because I live here. Because I'm supposed to be the Duchess, not just the Duke's decorative purchase. Because doing nothing is making me insane. He finished his whiskey and set down the glass with a soft clink. Fine. Fine? You want to manage the household? Manage it. I'll tell Mrs. Vale and Matthews that you have full authority over domestic operations. Budget, staff, all of it. Less work for me. Clara stared at him. Just like that? Did you want me to argue? I wanted something. A fight, maybe. Or at least a reason why I couldn't. I don't fight pointless battles. He moved toward the door, already mentally onto the next thing. You want responsibility, you can have it. Just don't bother me with the details unless the house is burning down. He was almost out of the room when she called after him. Darian? He paused, looking back. Thank you. Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, that she'd thanked him for something so basic. Don't thank me yet. You might regret asking once you see the actual state of the household finances. Mrs. Vale is efficient but not creative. We're probably overspending by 20%. Then I'll fix it. Good luck. And he was gone, leaving her alone with the books and the rain and the strangest feeling that something had just shifted, however slightly, in the careful balance of their arrangement. Monday morning, Mrs. Vale appeared at breakfast with the household ledgers, her expression suggesting she was being forced to hand over state secrets. His Grace has instructed me to provide you with full access to household operations, madam. Clara opened the first ledger and scanned the neat columns of expenses. Darian was right. The spending was absurd. They were paying premium prices for basic supplies, maintaining a staff level suited to a house that entertained constantly when they never entertained at all, and somehow burning through a budget that should have covered twice the house. Mrs. Vale, she said slowly, why are we employing 6 groundskeepers for gardens that no one ever sees? It's traditional, madam. The Wolf family has always maintained appearances regardless of practicality. Yes, I'm getting that. Clara flipped through more pages, her mind already reorganizing, restructuring, finding the inefficiencies. Here's what we're going to do. She spent the next 3 hours rebuilding the household from the ground up, cut redundant positions, renegotiated supplier contracts, restructured the staff schedule to eliminate waste. Mrs. Vale looked more horrified with each decision, but Clara didn't care. This was something she could actually control, something she could fix. By lunch, she'd trimmed 23% from the monthly budget without sacrificing quality or essential staff. By dinner, she'd implemented new systems for inventory and purchasing that would prevent the price gouging they'd been accepting for years. It felt good. Better than good. It felt like power. That evening, she found Darian in his study, buried in paperwork as usual. I cut your household expenses by almost a quarter, she announced from the doorway. He looked up, genuinely surprised. In one day? You were being robbed. Did you know your supplier for candles was charging you double the market rate? I don't personally review candle purchases, no. Well, someone should have been. I've renegotiated with a new supplier. We'll save £800 annually just on candles and lamp oil. He set down his pen, giving her his full attention for the first time since he'd returned. You did all this today. I told you I needed something to do. You gave me the household. I fixed it. She hesitated, then added, unless you want me to reverse the changes? No. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. No, keep them. That's good work, actually. The compliment was grudging, but it was real, and Clara felt a small surge of satisfaction that surprised her with its intensity. She'd impressed him, hadn't thought that was possible. I'm going to keep going, Mies, she said. Review the rest of the system, see what else can be improved. Do whatever you think best. He was already reaching for his papers again, their conversation apparently over in his mind. But Clara wasn't finished. Darian? Why did you really let me do this? You could have said no, told me to stay decorative like you wanted. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, because you were right. I bought you. The least I can do is not waste you. He met her eyes, his expression unreadable. And because my father always said idle people grow bitter, better you're busy than miserable. It wasn't romance, wasn't partnership, was barely kindness, really, but it was something. "I'll take it," Clara said. She left him to his work and went back to the household ledgers, feeling like she'd won a small battle in a war she hadn't known she was fighting. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, and through the window, she could see the first stars emerging in a clearing sky. Maybe this cage had more room in it than she'd thought. Maybe, just maybe, she could build something here after all. 3 months in, and Clara had transformed the household operations so thoroughly that even Matthews, Darian's perpetually skeptical secretary, admitted she'd accomplished something remarkable. "The quarterly report shows household expenses down 31%, he said one Tuesday afternoon, standing in the doorway of what had become Clara's study, a smaller room off the library that she'd claimed and reorganized despite Mrs. Vale's initial protests. "His Grace will be pleased." Clara didn't look up from the supply contract she was reviewing. "His Grace won't notice unless it affects his personal comfort, which it won't." Matthews cleared his throat delicately. "Nevertheless, madam, it's impressive work." After he left, Clara sat back and stared at the neat columns of numbers that represented her life now. She'd become exactly what Darian wanted, an efficient household manager who stayed out of his way. They maintained their careful distance, separate wings, separate schedules, brief encounters at dinner when he was actually home, which wasn't often. He spent more time in London than at Wolf Manor, handling his business empire while she ran his house like a well-oiled machine. It should have been enough. It was more autonomy than most wives in her position ever got. But something in her chest had started to ache with a loneliness she couldn't quite name. She was saved from spiraling further into that particular darkness by Annie rushing into the study, eyes wide with something between excitement and panic. "Madam, there's a visitor. She says she's a friend of yours, but she doesn't have an appointment, and Mrs. Vale doesn't know what to do because His Grace doesn't allow unannounced visitors, but the lady is very insistent, and Annie, breathe. Who is it?" "A Miss Cross, madam. Vivian Cross." Clara's stomach tightened. She hadn't seen Vivian since the wedding, though she'd thought about that conversation on the terrace more than once. The woman who'd known Darian since childhood, the old friend with weighted pauses and sharp eyes. "Show her to the drawing room," Clara said, standing. "I'll be there in a moment." "But Mrs. Vale said—" "I don't care what Mrs. Vale said. Show her in." When Clara entered the drawing room, Vivian was examining the space with the amused expression of someone who found everything slightly ridiculous. She wore a traveling dress in deep emerald that probably cost more than most people made in a year, and her copper hair was arranged in an elaborate style that somehow looked effortless. "Clara," she said warmly, crossing the room to take both Clara's hands in hers. "You look well. Managing this mausoleum must agree with you." "Vivian, this is unexpected. I was nearby, thought I'd call in." Her smile was bright and completely unbelievable. "You don't mind, do you? I know Darian hates surprise visitors, but he's in London, so I thought the rules might be more relaxed." Clara gestured to the sofa. "Tea. Please. And then you can tell me how married life is treating you. 3 months in, still speaking to each other?" "We speak when necessary." "That bad?" Vivian settled into the cushions with the ease of someone who'd been here many times before. "I did warn you." Tea arrived and Clara poured while trying to figure out what Vivian actually wanted. People didn't just happen to be nearby Wolf Manor. It was 40 miles from anything resembling civilization. "How is London society treating you?" Vivian asked. "Or haven't you been? I noticed you weren't at the Pemberton ball last week." "Darian attends those things alone." "Does he?" Something flickered in Vivian's eyes. "How very him. Keep the wife tucked away in the country while he maintains appearances in the city. It's the arrangement we agreed to." "Is it? Or is it the arrangement he told you to accept?" Vivian sipped her tea, watching Clara over the rim. "There's a difference, you know." Clara set down her cup with more force than necessary. "Why are you here, Vivian?" "Direct. I like that." Vivian leaned back, her expression shifting to something more serious. "I came because I thought you should know something. About Darian. About his life in London." The ache in Clara's chest tightened into something sharper. "I'm aware my husband has a life separate from me." "Are you aware of Cordelia Ashford?" The name hit like cold water. Clara kept her face carefully neutral. Should I be? Probably. She's been circling him for months. Since before your marriage, actually. Some people thought he'd marry her instead. Old money family, politically connected, exactly the kind of alliance that makes sense for someone like Darian. Vivian paused. She hasn't stopped circling. If you're trying to warn me that my husband might have mistresses in London, I'm neither surprised nor particularly bothered. We don't have that kind of marriage. Don't you care at all? What would be the point? Clara met Vivian's eyes steadily. I can't make him love me. I can't make him be present. All I can do is manage my part of this arrangement and try to build something resembling a life. Vivian studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're stronger than I thought. Most women would be devastated. Most women probably had different expectations going into their marriages. Fair enough. Vivian set down her teacup. But here's the thing, Clara. Cordelia isn't just some society flirtation. She's dangerous, ambitious, and she's been spreading rumors. What kind of rumors? That your marriage is a sham. That Darian only married you to settle your family's debts and gain access to your father's political connections. That he keeps you isolated here while he conducts his real life in London. That you're essentially his prisoner. Clara laughed, sharp and humorless. All of which is more or less true. Except the prisoner part. You could leave if you wanted. Could I? Where would I go? Back to my parents, who sold me to save themselves. Out into society with no money and a scandal attached to my name. Clara stood, moving to the window. Rain was starting again because, of course, it was. This cage might be gilded, but it's still a cage. Cordelia's not wrong about that. Then maybe you should come to London. Show society you're not some pathetic abandoned bride. Remind Darian that he has a wife who won't just disappear quietly. Why do you care what I do? Vivian was quiet for a beat too long. Because I've known Darian my whole life, and I've watched him turn into this cold, calculating machine who treats everything like a business transaction, including you. And I think... She stopped, started again. I think maybe you're the first person in a long time who could actually challenge him, make him feel something other than obligation and ambition. You're giving me far too much credit. Am I? Vivian stood, collecting her gloves. You've run his household better than anyone has in years. You've carved out power in a situation designed to keep you powerless. That takes intelligence and strength. Use it. After Vivian left, Clara stood in the drawing room for a long time, staring at nothing, her mind churning. Cordelia Ashford. Ambitious, dangerous, spreading rumors. Part of her wanted to ignore it. What did she care if Darian had someone else warming his bed in London? Their marriage was a contract, nothing more. But another part, smaller, sharper, refusing to be silenced, whispered that maybe it was time to stop accepting the terms she'd been given and start renegotiating. That evening, when Darian returned from London earlier than expected, Clara was waiting in his study. He stopped in the doorway, clearly surprised to find her there. Clara, did something happen with the household? Vivian Cross visited today. His expression shuddered immediately. Did she? She told me about Cordelia Ashford. Darian moved into the room, setting down his travel case with deliberate care. And what exactly did she tell you? That there's a woman in London who expected to be your wife, that she's been spreading rumors about our marriage, that you're keeping me isolated here while you live your real life in the city. All of which bothers you because... He poured himself a whiskey, not looking at her. Because I'm tired of being treated like furniture. Because I've held up my end of this arrangement and you can't be bothered to maintain even basic appearances. Because... She stopped, surprised by the anger in her own voice. Because maybe I deserve better than being your dirty secret. You're not a secret. Everyone knows we're married. Do they? How many society events have we attended together? How many times have you introduced me as your wife instead of leaving me here while you handle everything alone? You said you didn't want to be involved in my business life. I said I didn't expect romance. I never said I wanted to be invisible. Darian drank his whiskey, still not meeting her eyes. What do you want, Clara? I want to come to London. I want to be seen as your wife, not your embarrassing acquisition you've locked in the country. I want Cordelia Ashford and everyone else to know that this marriage exists. That's not practical. I'm working constantly in London. I don't have time to… To what? Acknowledge my existence in public? Take me to one dinner party a month? Introduce me to your associates? Clara moved closer, forcing him to look at her. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to stop pretending I don't exist. Something shifted in his expression. Anger, maybe, or frustration. You don't understand what you're asking. London society is vicious. They'll tear you apart looking for weakness. Then they'll be disappointed because I don't have any left to give them. You think you're strong enough for that world? I know I am. She held his gaze, refusing to back down. I've survived 3 months in this house being treated like a ghost. I've rebuilt your household systems from the ground up. I've carved out power from nothing. You think a few society women gossiping about me is worse than that? He was silent for a long moment, studying her with those cold gray eyes. Then, fine. Fine. There's a parliamentary dinner next Friday. Spouses are expected to attend. You want to come to London? Come to London, but don't complain when you realize what you've asked for. I won't. We'll see. He moved past her toward his desk, already dismissing her. Matthews will arrange the travel. We leave Thursday. Clara stood there, heart pounding with something that might have been victory or might have been fear. She'd won. She was going to London. She was going to show Cordelia Ashford and everyone else that she wasn't some pathetic abandoned bride. She just hoped she hadn't made a terrible mistake. The journey to London took 6 hours by train, and Darian spent most of it reading documents and making notes in the margins while Clara watched the countryside blur past. They shared a private car. Luxury she was getting used to, but might as well have been strangers for all the interaction they had. When they finally pulled into the station, a carriage was waiting to take them to the Wolf London residence, a 4-story townhouse in Mayfair that was somehow even more imposing than the manor. We're hosting a dinner tomorrow night, Darian said as they climbed the steps. 20 guests, business associates and their wives. You'll need to be present. That's why I'm here. The parliamentary dinner Friday is formal, black tie. I'll have Matthews send over a list of attendees so you know who you're dealing with. The door opened before they reached it, revealing a butler who made the one at Wolf Manor look warm and fuzzy. Your Grace, Madam, welcome. But she will deceive us. Inside was all marble and crystal and that same cold perfection that seemed to follow Darian everywhere. Clara was shown to a suite on the 3rd floor, separate from Darian's rooms, naturally, and left alone to prepare for dinner. The dinner party the next night was exactly as exhausting as Clara expected. 20 people crammed into the dining room, all watching her with varying degrees of interest and judgment, while she smiled and made small talk and pretended she did this all the time. The wives were polite in the way sharks are polite before they bite. The men barely acknowledged her existence except to compliment Darian on his charming wife. She was halfway through the fish course and contemplating faking illness to escape when the woman across from her, Lady Thornbury, wife of some railway magnate, leaned forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You must tell us, Mrs. Wolfe, how you're finding married life. It's been, 3 months now? 4, actually. 4, goodness, time flies, and you've been at Wolf Manor this whole time? Managing the household. Someone has to. Lady Thornbury's smile sharpened. How very domestic of you, though I'm sure you must get terribly lonely, tucked away in the country while the Duke attends to business in London. I stay quite busy. Oh, I'm sure you do. Still, it must be difficult being separated so often, especially for newlyweds. The table had gone quiet, everyone suddenly very interested in their plates while listening to every word. Clara felt Darian's attention on her from the head of the table, though his expression remained neutral. We manage, Clara said evenly. The Duke's work is important. I wouldn't dream of interfering. How understanding you are. Lady Thornbury sipped her wine. Not all wives would be so accommodating. Some might worry about what their husbands were doing in London without them. There it was. The knife sliding between ribs wrapped in polite concern. Clara set down her fork with precise care. Are you suggesting my husband is unfaithful, Lady Thornbury? The silence around the table crystallized into something sharp. I'm not suggesting anything, Lady Thornbury said quickly, backpedaling. Only that, because if you are, perhaps you should say so directly instead of hiding behind implications. Clara kept her voice pleasant, almost friendly, while she gutted the woman with words. I prefer honest conversation to polite assassination. Don't you? Lady Thornbury's face went red. She merely meant that city life can be isolating, Darian cut in smoothly, his voice carrying enough authority to shut down the conversation. Which is why I'm pleased my wife has decided to spend more time in London, starting immediately. The announcement landed like a bomb. Clara felt every eye in the room swivel to her, reassessing, recalculating. How lovely, someone murmured. The conversation shifted, moved on, but Clara could feel the undercurrent of speculation running beneath every word for the rest of the evening. When the ladies retired to the drawing room after dinner, she was surrounded by women who suddenly wanted to know everything about her plans in London. You simply must join us for the charity auction next week, one gushed. Have you secured a box at the opera yet? We could arrange an introduction to the board. My daughter is having a tea on Thursday. You must come. I insist. Clara smiled and made vague commitments while internally cataloging every fake smile and calculating look. These weren't friends. They were reconnaissance, figuring out where she fit in the social hierarchy, whether she was an ally or a threat. She was still smiling when Vivian appeared in the doorway. Sorry I'm late, she announced to no one in particular, sweeping in with the confidence of someone who'd never been uninvited anywhere. Traffic was nightmarish. Clara, there you are. I've been looking for you everywhere. She crossed the room and linked arms with Clara like they were old friends, which they absolutely were not, and steered her toward the terrace doors. What are you doing? Clara hissed. Rescuing you. You're welcome. Once they were outside in the cool night air, Vivian released her arm. That was quite a performance in there. Lady Thornbury looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. She deserved it. Oh, absolutely, but you've made an enemy. She's vicious when she's been humiliated. I'll survive. Vivian studied her with something like approval. You might actually. You're tougher than you look. She glanced back through the windows at the gathering inside. So Darian announced you're staying in London. That must have been your idea. Is there a point to this conversation? Just curious if you know what you're walking into. London society makes country life look gentle, and Cordelia... She stopped. Well, speak of the devil. Clara followed her gaze. Through the window, she could see a woman entering the drawing room, tall, elegant, with dark hair arranged in perfect waves, and a dress that probably cost more than Clara's entire wardrobe. She moved through the room like she owned it, greeting people with the ease of someone completely comfortable in her power. That's her? Clara asked. In the flesh. Cordelia Ashford. Beautiful, isn't she? And absolutely ruthless. She's probably already heard you're in London and planning her next move. Let her plan. You're not even a little worried? Clara watched Cordelia through the glass, laughing at something Lord Pemberton said, touching his arm with casual familiarity. She looked like someone who'd never been denied anything in her life. Should I be? Most women would be terrified of her. I'm not most women. Clara turned away from the window. And I didn't claw my way into authority at Wolf Manor just to be intimidated by some society climber who thinks she can steal my husband. Vivian's smile was sharp and genuine. There's the fighter I was hoping for. Good. You're going to need that fire. They went back inside together, and Clara spent the rest of the evening making polite conversation while very aware of Cordelia Ashford's presence in the room, always just in her peripheral vision, never quite looking her way, but somehow making her presence impossible to ignore. When the guests finally left and Clara was alone in her suite, exhausted and wired simultaneously, there was a knock at the door. Darian stood in the hallway, still in his evening clothes, looking as tired as she felt. That was quite a dinner, he said. Lady Thornbury started it. And you finished it, effectively. He leaned against the doorframe. You held your own tonight. I wasn't sure you would. You underestimate me. Clearly. He was quiet for a moment. Cordelia was there. I noticed. She'll come after you, not directly. She's too smart for that. But she'll find ways to undermine you, spread rumors, turn people against you. Why are you warning me? Because despite what you think, I don't actually want to see you destroyed. He straightened, preparing to leave. And because if you're going to survive in London, you need to understand what you're up against. Cordelia doesn't just want social position, she wants power. And she sees me as the way to get it. What does she see me as? An obstacle to remove. After he left, Clara stood at the window, looking out over the darkened streets of Mayfair. Somewhere out there, Cordelia Ashford was probably planning her next move. And Lady Thornbury was probably spreading gossip about the awkward country wife who'd dared to challenge her. But Clara wasn't the same girl who'd walked down the aisle 4 months ago, accepting her fate with quiet resignation. She'd found power in the ruins of Wolf Manor. She'd built authority from nothing, and if Cordelia Ashford wanted a war, Clara would give her one. The parliamentary dinner on Friday was held at the Belmont Hotel, in a ballroom that dripped with crystal and gold, and the accumulated wealth of the empire's most powerful men and their wives. Clara wore midnight blue silk that had cost a small fortune and made her look like she belonged here. Darian had offered his arm when they'd arrived, and they'd walked in together like an actual couple, presenting a united front to the room full of wolves in evening wear. "Remember," he'd murmured as they entered, "these people will smile at you while planning your destruction. Trust no one." Cheerful advice. Honest advice. They were separated almost immediately. Darian pulled into conversations with politicians and industrialists, Clara absorbed by a group of wives who wanted to interrogate her about everything from her family background to her opinions on the new railway legislation. She was holding her own, parrying questions with practiced ease, when she felt it, that prickle of awareness that said someone was watching her. Cordelia Ashford stood across the ballroom holding court with a group of admirers, but her eyes were locked on Clara with an intensity that was almost physical. Then she smiled, sharp, predatory, and started walking over. "Mrs. Wolfe," she said warmly when she reached them as if they were old friends. "How wonderful to finally meet you. I've heard so much about you." Up close, she was even more striking. Dark eyes, perfect features, the kind of beauty that opened doors and destroyed rivals. She wore burgundy silk that was cut just daringly enough to be interesting without crossing into scandalous. "All good things, I hope," Clara said lightly. "Oh, the best things. How you've transformed Wolf Manor, how you've managed the household so brilliantly. Darian speaks of you often." The lie was so smooth, Clara almost missed it. Darian barely spoke to her, let alone about her. "How kind of him," Clara said. "And you are—" "Cordelia Ashford, old family friend." She gestured vaguely toward where Darian stood. "We've known each other for years, since before his father died, actually. I was there when he took over the business, helped him navigate some of the more difficult social aspects. The message was clear. I was here first. I know him better than you ever will." "How fortunate he had such support," Clara said. "Though I imagine things are different now, given that he has a wife." Cordelia's smile didn't waver. "Of course, though support from old friends never goes out of style, especially when—" She trailed off delicately. "Well, when a marriage is more practical than passionate." Clara felt the knife slide in, perfectly placed to wound without showing blood. "And yet," Clara said softly, "it's a marriage nonetheless, which means whatever arrangements existed before no longer apply. I'm sure you understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly." Cordelia's eyes hardened almost imperceptibly. "Though I wonder if you understand what you've married into. This world isn't kind to outsiders, to people who don't know the rules. Then it's fortunate I'm a quick study." They stood there, smiling at each other like friends, while hostility crackled between them like electricity. Around them, conversations continued, but Clara could feel people watching, sensing the confrontation, even if they couldn't hear it. "Ladies!" Vivian appeared between them like a referee stopping a boxing match. "How lovely you both look. Clara, I need to steal you for just a moment. There's someone you simply must meet." She guided Clara away before Cordelia could respond, her grip tight on Clara's arm. "What the hell was that?" Vivian hissed once they were out of earshot. "She came to me. And you practically declared war in the middle of a parliamentary dinner. Do you have any idea how many people just watched that?" "I don't care. You should care. Cordelia doesn't fight fair, and you just gave her ammunition." But Clara was done being careful, done being invisible, done accepting the terms other people set for her life. "Good," she said. Let her come. She found Darian an hour later, standing alone on a balcony overlooking the hotel gardens, whiskey in hand, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Your friend Cordelia cornered me," she said without preamble. "She's not my friend." "What is she then?" Darian was quiet for a long moment, staring into his glass. "A complication from before we were married. Someone who thought we had an understanding that we didn't." "Did you sleep with her?" He turned, surprise flickering across his face. "That's a very direct question. You said you appreciate honesty over comfortable lies. So I'm being honest. Did you?" "No." He met her eyes. "I didn't. Despite what she may have implied or what people assume, nothing happened between us. She wanted it to. I didn't." "Why not?" "Because mixing business with that kind of entanglement is messy, and because I didn't want her. Still don't." He took a drink. "But she doesn't accept rejection well. Hence the complications. She's dangerous." "Yes." "And she's not going to stop trying to undermine me." "No, she's not." Clara leaned against the balustrade, looking out at the dark gardens. "Then I suppose we're at war." "You don't have to fight her. You could just ignore her. Let the rumors die down naturally." "Could you? If someone was actively trying to destroy something you'd built?" He was quiet. Then, "No, I'd go after them until they broke." "Oh, then you understand why I can't back down." Darian studied her profile in the lamplight, and when he spoke again, his voice held something she'd never heard before. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Well, someone who'd accept the arrangement quietly, be comfortable and ornamental, and leave me alone." "Sorry to disappoint." "I didn't say I was disappointed." He finished his whiskey, set the glass on the balustrade. "But be careful, Clara. Cordelia plays to win, and she doesn't care who gets hurt in the process." "Neither do I. Not anymore." Something shifted in the air between them. An understanding, maybe, or the first crack in the careful distance they'd maintained. But before either of them could say anything else, Matthews appeared in the doorway. "Your Grace, Lord Harrington needs a word. Something about the railway vote." Darian nodded, already moving, but he paused at the door, looking back at Clara. "Stay visible tonight. Let people see us together. It'll make things more difficult for her." It wasn't romance, wasn't protection, really, but it was something closer to partnership than they'd managed in 4 months of marriage. She'd take it. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversations and careful positioning. Darian stayed near her more than he had all night, a silent statement of unity that didn't go unnoticed. Clara saw Cordelia watching them from across the room, her expression unreadable, but her posture rigid with displeasure. When they finally left, exhausted and wrung out, Clara thought maybe she'd survived her first real battle. She was wrong. The next morning, she woke to Annie frantically knocking on her door. "Madam, please, you need to see this. It's in all the papers." Clara sat up, heart already sinking. "What is?" Annie handed her a newspaper, face pale. The headline screamed, "Duke's Desperate Bride, Wolf Marriage Scandal Exposed." Below it, a detailed account of how Darian had married Clara purely to settle her family's debts, how he kept her isolated in the country while maintaining his real life in London, how the marriage was a sham designed to give him social respectability while she lived like a prisoner in Wolf Manor. Every rumor Vivian had warned her about, printed in black and white for all of London to read. And at the bottom, a quote from an unnamed source. "Those who know the Duke well say this marriage was always a business transaction. One wonders how long the poor Duchess will tolerate such cold treatment before she realizes she's been bought and abandoned." Clara read it twice, fury building in her chest like a storm. Cordelia. It had to be. She was still staring at the newspaper when Darian burst into her room without knocking, his own copy crumpled in his fist, his face darker than she'd ever seen it. "Pack your things," he said. "We're going back to the manor. Like hell we are." "Clara." "No." She stood, still in her nightgown, holding the newspaper like evidence in a trial. "That's exactly what she wants, for me to run back to the country with my tail between my legs while she wins. This isn't about winning. This is about damage control. This is about sending a message. And if I leave now, the message is that she was right, that I'm weak, that I don't belong here. You don't understand what this will do. The scandal is already out there. Running won't make it go away. It'll just confirm every word. She moved closer, forcing him to look at her. I'm staying in London. I'm going to every event, every dinner, every social gathering until people see with their own eyes that this marriage is real. And I'm going to make Cordelia Ashford regret ever coming after me. Darian stared at her, jaw tight, clearly torn between pragmatism and something else she couldn't quite identify. This will get worse before it gets better, he finally said. I know. People will be cruel. They'll tear you apart looking for weakness. Let them try. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his eyes, a decision being made. All right, he said quietly. We stay. We fight. But we do it together. Not as separated spouses playing roles. Actually, together. What does that mean? It means we share the townhouse properly, no separate wings. It means we attend events as a united front, not two people who happen to be married. It means we give them nothing to use against us. He paused. It means acting like we're actually married, even if we're not. Clara's heart was pounding, but her voice stayed steady. And after, when this is over, we'll figure that out when we get there. It wasn't a declaration of love, wasn't even a promise of friendship, but it was an alliance forged in the fire of scandal and warfare. She held out her hand. He took it. And somewhere across London, Cordelia Ashford had just made her first serious mistake. She'd underestimated the woman she was trying to destroy. The scandal didn't die. It metastasized. By Monday morning, 3 more newspapers had picked up the story, each adding their own salacious details. By Tuesday, society matrons were whispering about it over tea, their voices dripping with false sympathy and genuine delight. By Wednesday, Clara had received 17 invitations to social events, not because anyone wanted her there, but because everyone wanted to watch her squirm. She accepted every single one. You're insane, Vivian said, sprawled across the sofa in Clara's sitting room while Clara sorted through the pile of cream-colored cards. Half these invitations are traps. They want to see you cry. Then they'll be disappointed. Lady Pemberton's garden party is particularly vicious. She invites people specifically to humiliate them in front of her friends. It's her favorite hobby. Clara set aside Lady Pemberton's invitation in the accept pile. Perfect. I'll give her something to talk about. Vivian sat up, studying her with something between admiration and concern. You've changed. When I met you at the wedding, you seemed almost resigned, like you'd accepted your fate and were just going through the motions. That was before someone tried to destroy me in the newspapers. Clara picked up another invitation, the Harrington Ball, 2 weeks out. I'm done being quiet, done being convenient. Good, but be smart about it. Cordelia's already 3 moves ahead. The newspaper story was just the opening salvo. What makes you so sure it was her? Because I know her. We grew up together, went to the same schools, moved in the same circles. She's been planning her rise to power since she was 16. Vivian paused. And she's wanted Darian almost as long. Why? The money? The money, the status, the empire he's building. Cordelia doesn't just want to marry well. She wants to be the power behind the throne. Darian's ambitious, brilliant, and controllable if you know how to manage him. At least that's what she thinks. She's wrong. Is she? Vivian tilted her head. He married you for practical reasons. He keeps you at arm's length. He works constantly and treats emotion like a weakness. That's exactly the kind of man Cordelia knows how to manipulate. Someone who thinks everything can be reduced to logic and transaction. Clara thought about the conversation on the balcony. Darian's admission that he'd never slept with Cordelia, his offer to fight this together. She doesn't know him as well as she thinks. Maybe. Or maybe you don't know him as well as you think you do. Before Clara could respond, Annie knocked and entered, looking nervous. Madam, His Grace is asking for you. In his study. He said it's urgent. Clara found Darian behind his desk, surrounded by papers, his expression darker than the storm clouds gathering outside. Matthew stood near the window, looking equally grim. We have a problem, Darian said without preamble. Sit down. She sat. How bad? The scandals affecting business. 3 investors pulled out of the railway expansion this morning. 2 more are reconsidering their position. Lord Harrington called to express his concerns about associating with someone whose personal life is generating such negative attention. They're abandoning you because of gossip? They're abandoning me because reputation matters in business. Stability matters. And right now, we look unstable. Osati Matdi Chaits. He pushed a letter across the desk. This came from the board of the Northern Industrial Alliance. They're questioning whether I should remain as chairman given the personal complications affecting my judgment. Clara read the letter, fury building with each sanctimonious line. This is Cordelia. We don't know that for certain, Matthews said carefully. Yes, we do. She's going after his business because she knows that's what matters to him. Destroy his professional reputation, and he has to do something about the marriage causing the problem. Namely, me. Darian's jaw tightened. I'm not divorcing you to appease a board of old men who care more about appearances than results. But, Clara heard it in his voice, but we need to do something. The longer this drags out, the more damage it does. He leaned back, exhaustion written across his face. Matthews and I have been discussing options, such as, we could issue a public statement, something about malicious rumors and reaffirming the strength of our marriage. That sounds defensive, like we're trying to convince people instead of just being married. What do you suggest? Clara thought about it, running through scenarios in her mind. We prove it. Prove what? That our marriage is real, that we're a united front, that anyone trying to drive a wedge between us is wasting their time. She stood, pacing the room. The Harrington Ball, 2 weeks out. Everyone who matters will be there, including Cordelia. We attend together, we're visibly affectionate, we show the world exactly what they're not seeing in the newspapers. Visibly affectionate, Darian repeated, his tone skeptical. We barely touch each other. Then we learn. We practice. We act like we're actually in love instead of business partners who happen to share a last name. Matthews cleared his throat. It could work. A strong public showing might counteract the rumors. And if the Duchess is seen as a devoted wife rather than an abandoned bride, the narrative shifts. I don't do performances, Darian said flatly. You do them every day in business meetings. You negotiate, you posture, you project exactly what you want people to believe. Clara moved closer, forcing him to meet her eyes. This is just another negotiation. Except instead of railway contracts, we're negotiating our survival in society. He was silent for a long moment, calculating risks and benefits like he did everything else. Finally, all right, but if we're doing this, we do it properly. No half measures. Agreed. That means spending time together. Actual time, not just appearing at events. We need to look comfortable with each other like a real couple, and that requires practice. Fine. And it means sharing the townhouse properly. Same wing, adjacent rooms, people talk. And right now the servants know we're living separately. That information will get back to society. Clara's heart kicked up, but she kept her voice steady. Whatever it takes. Matthews excused himself, muttering something about drafting statements, and suddenly Clara was alone with Darian in his study, the air thick with implications. This is going to be strange, he said quietly. Everything about our marriage is strange. Fair point. He stood, moving to the window. Outside, rain had started, turning Mayfair into a blur of gray. I meant what I said earlier about fighting this together. But I need you to understand this doesn't change the fundamental arrangement. Once the scandal dies down, we go back to our separate lives. I know. Clara joined him at the window. But until then, we're allies. Allies, he repeated. I can work with that. The next week was a masterclass in manufactured intimacy. They started with the basics, walking arm in arm through Hyde Park, where society gathered to see and be seen. Darian's hand resting on the small of her back at dinners, casual touches that looked natural to observers but felt alien to both of them, like learning a new language where every gesture had to be calculated. You're too stiff, Clara said during one practice session in the townhouse drawing room. They were attempting to waltz, preparing for the Harrington Ball, and Darian moved like he was executing military drills. I'm leading. You're marching. There's a difference. She adjusted his hand on her waist. Relax. You're supposed to look like you enjoy dancing with me, not like you're suffering through a business obligation. I am suffering through a business obligation. Well, hide it better. Something almost like a smile flickered across his face. You're very demanding. You're very resistant to anything that requires actual human emotion. They continued the waltz, and slowly, painfully slowly, he began to loosen up. His movements became more fluid, less mechanical. By the end of the song, they were actually moving together instead of fighting for control. Better, Clara said, breathless from the effort. Don't sound so surprised. I'm learning to never assume you're capable of warmth. Keeps expectations realistic. This time the smile fully formed, brief but genuine. See, we're making progress. But the progress came with complications. Sharing a wing of the townhouse meant proximity Clara hadn't prepared for. Hearing him move around in the adjacent room late at night, the scent of his cologne lingering in the shared sitting room, the strange intimacy of breakfast together instead of separated by the length of a dining table. One night, she found him in the library at 2 a.m, surrounded by paperwork and looking like he hadn't slept in days. You're going to kill yourself working like this, she said from the doorway. He didn't look up. Someone has to keep the empire running while we're busy playing house for society. It's not playing house, it's damage control. Semantics. He signed something, moved it to another pile. Go back to bed, Clara. She should have. Should have left him to his self-imposed isolation and gone back to her room. Instead, she crossed to his desk and took the pen from his hand. What are you... Teaching you something. She set the pen down, ignoring his protest. There's a concept called diminishing returns. When you work past a certain point of exhaustion, you make mistakes, bad decisions. You cost yourself more than you gain. I don't have the luxury of rest right now. Yes, you do. The work will be there in the morning. It always is. She held out her hand. Come on. He stared at her hand like it was a foreign object. Where? Does it matter? Anywhere but this desk. For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then, surprising them both, he took her hand and let her pull him to his feet. They ended up in the darkened drawing room, where moonlight streamed through tall windows and the only sound was rain against glass. Now what? He asked. Now we just exist, without working, without performing. Just being two people who happen to be awake at 2 a.m. That's not productive. Not everything has to be productive. They stood there in the darkness, not touching, not speaking, just breathing the same air for the first time in their marriage without an agenda driving the interaction. It should have been awkward. Instead, it felt almost peaceful. Your father, Clara said quietly. Was he a workaholic too? Darian stiffened. What made you think of him? The library at Wolf Manor, his annotations in the books. He seemed different from you. He was. Darian moved to the window, putting distance between them. He loved people, loved entertaining, loved life, made friends everywhere he went, built the business on relationships and charm as much as shrewd investment. What happened to him? Riding accident. His horse spooked during a hunt, threw him into a stone wall. He was dead before anyone could get to him. The words came out flat, emotionless. I was 17, suddenly responsible for an empire I barely understood, surrounded by men twice my age waiting for me to fail so they could carve up the pieces. So you taught yourself to be harder than all of them. I taught myself that emotion is a liability, that caring about things beyond business makes you vulnerable, that the only way to survive was to be better, sharper, more ruthless than anyone else. He turned back to her, his expression unreadable in the shadows. It worked. I tripled the family holdings in 10 years. Proved everyone wrong who said I was too young, too inexperienced, and turned yourself into a machine in the process. Machines don't get hurt, don't make mistakes based on feelings, don't leave themselves open to manipulation. They also don't live, Clara said softly. They just function. He was silent for a long moment, then, maybe that's enough. Is it? She thought he might answer, might actually let her in past the walls he'd spent a decade building. But footsteps in the hall made them both turn, a servant making late-night rounds, oblivious to the conversation he was interrupting. The moment broke. Darian straightened, his mask sliding back into place. I should get back to work, he said. Darian, thank you for the break. It was unexpected. He was gone before she could say anything else, leaving her alone in the moonlit drawing room, wondering if she'd just glimpsed the real man beneath the armor, or if she'd only imagined it. Lady Pemberton's garden party was exactly as vicious as Vivian had warned. The event was held at the Pemberton estate in Richmond, where London's elite gathered on the manicured lawns to drink champagne, gossip viciously, and destroy reputations under the guise of polite conversation. Clara and Darian arrived together in a carriage that probably cost more than most people's houses, presenting a united front to the crowd of sharks in silk and pearls. Remember, Darian murmured as they climbed the steps, we're desperately in love. Try to look like you can tolerate my presence. I'll do my best to hide my disgust. His hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her arm, the closest thing to amusement she'd gotten from him all morning. Lady Pemberton greeted them at the entrance with a smile that would freeze fire. Your Graces, how wonderful you could attend. We were just saying how brave you are coming out in public despite all the unfortunate talk. Brave would be letting gossip dictate our lives, Clara said smoothly. We prefer to live them instead. How very modern of you. Lady Pemberton's eyes glittered with malice. Do come in. I've seated you near the fountain. Such a lovely spot. Everyone will be able to see you. Which was exactly the point. Put them on display where every stumble, every awkward moment would be witnessed and dissected. They took their seats at a small table near a marble fountain surrounded by roses. Within minutes, they were approached by a steady stream of society vultures, all wearing sympathetic expressions while their eyes hunted for weakness. Such terrible rumors, one woman cooed. You must be devastated by all the lies being spread. We're managing quite well, actually, Clara said, letting Darian take her hand across the table. His thumb brushed her knuckles, a calculated gesture, but effective. Some people have nothing better to do than invent scandals where none exist. Still, where there's smoke, there's fire, as they say. They also say that small minds discuss people while great minds discuss ideas. Clara's smile stayed pleasant. Which are we discussing right now? The woman flushed and retreated. Another took her place almost immediately. The Duchess is right, a man Clara vaguely recognized as Lord Something or Other said. These rumors are clearly fabricated. Anyone can see the Duke and Duchess are perfectly matched. Matched in what sense? Cordelia's voice cut through the polite murmur of conversation like a blade. She stood behind them, resplendent in cream silk that probably cost more than Clara's entire wardrobe, her expression the picture of innocent curiosity. Miss Ashford, Darian said, his voice notably cooler. I didn't realize you'd been invited. Oh, Margaret and I are old friends. She knows I never miss her garden parties. Cordelia moved closer, her eyes on Clara. I was just curious what Lord Brennan meant by perfectly matched. In temperament, interests, or simply in the pragmatic sense of a business arrangement? The surrounding conversations quieted. People turned to watch, sensing blood in the water. Clara set down her champagne with deliberate care. In every sense that matters in a marriage, though I wouldn't expect someone outside it to understand the depth of that connection. Of course not. I would never presume. Cordelia's smile sharpened. Though I do find it fascinating how marriages evolve. Sometimes what begins as one thing transforms into something quite different. Don't you agree, Darian? The use of his first name was deliberate, claiming familiarity, suggesting intimacy. I think, Darian said, standing and offering his hand to Clara, that my wife and I would prefer to enjoy the gardens, if you'll excuse us. They walked away from the table, from Cordelia's poisonous insinuations, from the watching crowd. But Clara could feel the damage settling in. Another performance, another public confrontation, more fuel for the gossip mills. She's relentless, Clara said once they were out of earshot. She's desperate. People who are winning don't need to keep attacking. Are we winning? Because it doesn't feel like winning. Darian stopped near a secluded corner of the garden where rose trellises provided some privacy. We're surviving. That's what matters right now. For how long? Until the next newspaper article? The next public ambush? She's not going to stop until one of us breaks. Then we don't break. Clara laughed, sharp and humorless. Easy for you to say. You're used to this world, to these battles. I'm just trying not to drown. You're doing better than you think. He reached out, then hesitated, his hand hovering near her face before dropping. The gesture was so unlike him, uncertain, almost tender, that it stopped her spiral of frustration. You stood up to Lady Thornberry. You handled Cordelia. You've attended every vicious social event without flinching. That's not drowning. That's fighting. It doesn't feel like enough. It is enough. It has to be. They stood there in the dappled sunlight, surrounded by roses and hidden from the circling sharks, and Clara felt something shift between them. That same crack in the armor she'd glimpsed in the library, wider now, more real. "Why did you never marry her?" she asked quietly. "Cordelia, before me. If she wanted you, if everyone expected it, why didn't you?" Darian was silent for a long moment. "Because I would have been miserable. She would have managed me, controlled me, turned me into her puppet. I saw what my father had with my mother, real partnership, genuine affection, and I knew I couldn't settle for less. Better to be alone than be consumed by someone who only wants the title and the power. So you married me instead, for different practical reasons. Yes, that's honest, at least. I promised you honesty. You did." Clara looked up at him, at the man who'd become her husband through transaction, but was slowly, painfully becoming something more complicated. "Do you regret it, the marriage?" He met her eyes, and for once, his expression was completely open. "Ask me again when this is over." Before either of them could say anything else, shouting erupted from the direction of the house, urgent, panicked voices that cut through the genteel atmosphere of the garden party like a knife. They ran back to find chaos, servants rushing around, guests clustered in worried groups, Lady Pemberton standing on the terrace looking pale and shaken. "What happened?" Darian demanded. "A robbery," someone said. "During the party, someone broke into the house and ransacked Lady Pemberton's private rooms. Her jewelry, all of it, is gone." "How much?" Clara asked. £30,000 worth at least. Lord Pemberton pushed through the crowd, his face red with fury. And they knew exactly where to look. This wasn't a random theft. Someone had inside knowledge. The police were called. Guests were questioned. The party devolved into interviews and accusations as everyone tried to determine who might have had access, who might have known where the jewelry was kept. Clara and Darian were questioned along with everyone else. Routine, perfunctory, quickly dismissed. But as they were leaving, Clara saw something that made her blood run cold. Cordelia, standing near the French doors that led to the house's interior, watching the chaos with an expression that was just slightly too satisfied. And on her wrist, barely visible under her sleeve, a bracelet that caught the light, a distinctive piece with alternating diamonds and sapphires. The same bracelet Clara had seen in a photograph on Lady Pemberton's mantle during a tour of the house earlier that afternoon. "A family heirloom," Lady Pemberton had said proudly. "Never leaves my possession." Clara's breath stopped. No, it couldn't be. That would be insane. Stealing jewelry at a garden party, wearing one of the stolen pieces in full view. Unless that was exactly the point. Unless the goal wasn't just theft, but chaos. Frame someone else, create more scandal, turn the heat up even higher on the Duke and Duchess of Wolf. She started to move toward Cordelia, to confront her, to demand answers, but Darian's hand on her arm stopped her. "Don't," he said quietly. "Not here, not now. But I saw it too. We handle this carefully, or we're the ones who end up accused." He was right. Of course he was right. But Clara's hands were shaking with fury as they climbed into their carriage and left the Pemberton estate behind, leaving chaos and suspicion in their wake. "She's escalating," Clara said as they rolled through Richmond toward London. The newspaper articles weren't enough. The public confrontations weren't enough. Now she's committing actual crimes to frame us. We don't know for certain she's framing us. Could just be stirring chaos generally. You saw the bracelet. I saw a bracelet that might have been similar. We can't accuse her of theft based on a glimpse. Then what do we do? Darian stared out the window, jaw tight with anger he wouldn't fully express. We wait. We watch. And we gather evidence before we strike. But when they arrived back at the townhouse, they found Matthews waiting with an expression that meant more bad news. What now? Darian asked, exhaustion heavy in his voice. The police were here, looking for you both. Matthews handed over an official-looking document. Someone reported seeing the Duchess near Lady Pemberton's private rooms during the party, just before the robbery was discovered. Clara's world tilted. That's not... I never went near her rooms. I was in the garden with Darian the entire time. I know, madam, and I told them that. But they're building a case based on witness testimony. Apparently, 3 separate guests claim to have seen you heading toward that wing of the house around the time of the theft. Oh? Who? Darian's voice was dangerous. Who made these claims? The witnesses wish to remain anonymous at this time. Of course they do. Clara sank into a chair, the full weight of what was happening crashing down. She's not just attacking my reputation anymore. She's trying to destroy me completely, make me a criminal. We'll fight this, yeah, Darian said, crouching beside her chair. We'll get lawyers. We'll prove you weren't anywhere near those rooms. With what evidence? It's my word against 3 anonymous witnesses. And right now, with all the scandals surrounding us, whose word do you think society will believe? She looked up at him, and in his eyes, she saw the same understanding settling in. Cordelia hadn't just escalated. She'd found a way to potentially destroy them both. Because if Clara was arrested, tried for theft, the scandal would consume everything. The business, the reputation, the empire Darian had built. She's backing us into a corner, Clara whispered. Either we find a way to prove my innocence and expose her, or the sentence hung unfinished in the air between them. Because the alternative was too horrific to speak aloud. Clara arrested, their marriage publicly destroyed, everything they'd fought for obliterated in one calculated move. Outside, the sky had darkened to the color of a bruise, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Somewhere across London, Cordelia Ashford was probably celebrating her victory. But Clara wasn't finished yet, not even close. She just had to survive long enough to figure out how to fight back. The rain hammered against the windows all night, while Clara sat in the darkened study, her mind racing through possibilities like a caged animal looking for escape routes. Arrested, tried, publicly destroyed. Those were the stakes now, and passive defense wasn't going to save her. Around 3 a.m, Darian found her still there, surrounded by newspapers and society columns she'd been dissecting for patterns. You need to sleep, he said from the doorway. I need to think. She didn't look up from the article she was reading, a gossip piece from 6 months ago about Cordelia attending some charity gala. Sleep is a luxury people with normal problems get to have. He crossed to the sideboard, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and set one in front of her. Drink, then sleep. We can't strategize if you collapse from exhaustion. I'm not going to collapse. But she took the whiskey anyway, the burn grounding her spinning thoughts. I'm going to find the hole in her armor. Clara, everyone has one. A weakness. Something that breaks them when you apply the right pressure. She finally looked at him, and something in her expression made him go still. Cordelia spent months attacking me, destroying my reputation, isolating me, but she made a mistake today. What mistake? She got greedy, the theft, the false witnesses. It's too much, too fast. People might believe I'm a social climbing nobody who trapped you into marriage. They might even believe our relationship is cold. But theft? At a garden party surrounded by witnesses? That doesn't match the narrative she's been building. Clara stood, pacing. She's desperate, which means we're closer to winning than we think. Darian studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. What are you planning? Something that would horrify your sense of propriety. She met his eyes. I'm going to investigate her, dig into her background, her finances, her connections, find out what she's hiding, and use it to destroy her before she destroys us. That's dangerous. If she catches you, then I'll be careful not to get caught. Clara moved closer, her voice dropping. You said we're allies. That means trusting me to fight this battle the way I know how. I can't match her in society politics or manipulation, but I can outthink her. I can find the truth she's been hiding. He was silent for a long moment, and she watched the calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing risks, considering alternatives, trying to find a better plan. Finally, you'll need help. I work alone. Not this time. If you're going to dig into Cordelia's life, you need access to places and information you can't get on your own. He set down his glass. Matthews can access financial records through business channels. Vivian knows society better than anyone. She can tell you who to talk to, where the skeletons are buried, and I can keep Cordelia distracted while you work. Clara stared at him, surprised. You're actually supporting this. I'm being practical. We're backed into a corner with no clean way out. Sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to survive. His jaw tightened, and I'm tired of watching her destroy everything I've built while I play by rules she's already broken. Something fierce and hot flared in Clara's chest. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition. For the first time since they'd met, they were actually on the same side, without pretense or calculation. Just two people fighting for survival against a common enemy. All right, she said. Then let's burn her world down. By morning, they had a plan. Matthews would trace Cordelia's finances through banking contacts and business associates. Vivian would work her society connections, finding out what people knew but weren't saying, and Clara would do what she did best, organize, analyze, and find the patterns no one else was seeing. She has to have made mistakes, Clara said over breakfast while they divided responsibilities. No one orchestrates this level of sabotage without leaving traces. We just have to find them. Start with the theft, Darian suggested. That's our most immediate problem and potentially her sloppiest work. If we can prove she was involved, everything else unravels. Clara nodded, already making mental notes. I need to talk to Lady Pemberton. Find out exactly what was stolen, who had access, who knew where the jewelry was kept. Lady Pemberton won't talk to you, not after being robbed at her own party. Then I'll make her. Clara's smile was sharp. I'm getting very good at doing things people say I can't. Vivian arrived at noon, dropped her gloves on the hall table like she owned the place, and immediately demanded coffee. You look terrible, both of you. Please tell me you have an actual plan and aren't just spiraling into panic. We have a plan, Clara said, leading her to the study. We're going to destroy Cordelia Ashford. Finally, I thought you'd never ask. Vivian settled into a chair, looking delighted. What do you need from me? Information. Everything you know about Cordelia's past, her family, her finances, her secrets. Anything that could be weaponized. That's a long list. Vivian accepted the coffee Annie brought in. But I'll start with the interesting parts. Cordelia's family isn't as wealthy as they pretend. Her father gambled away most of their fortune before he died. They've been living on credit and strategic marriages for the last decade. Clara's mind caught on that detail like a hook. Strategic marriages? Her older sister married a viscount with more money than sense. Cordelia was supposed to make a similar match, but she aimed higher, wanted a duke. Vivian's eyes glinted. Specifically, your duke. How badly does she need the money? Badly enough that if she doesn't marry well soon, her family will be ruined. They've been borrowing against the expectation of her making a brilliant match. If that doesn't happen, she made a sliding motion with her hand. Collapse. Clara felt pieces clicking into place. So this isn't just about social ambition, it's about survival. If she can't secure Darian, her entire family goes down. Which makes her exponentially more dangerous, Darian said from where he'd been listening near the window. Desperate people make reckless choices. Like framing someone for theft to create a scandal so devastating that you'd have to divorce me and the path would be clear for her. Clara stood, pacing again. But if we can prove she's financially desperate, we can establish motive. Show that she's been orchestrating this entire campaign to force your hand. Proving motive isn't the same as proving guilt, Vivian pointed out. You need evidence, hard evidence that ties her to the theft and the false witnesses. Then we get evidence. Clara turned to Darian. You said Matthews can access financial records? Through discrete channels, yes, but it takes time. We don't have time. The police could issue a warrant for my arrest any day. She thought for a moment, then made a decision that felt reckless and necessary. I'm going to talk to the witnesses. The anonymous witnesses who accused you? Darian's expression darkened. That's insane. If they report you tried to intimidate them, they won't. Because I'm not going to intimidate them. I'm going to figure out who paid them to lie. Clara grabbed her cloak from the back of the chair. Vivian, can you find out who the witnesses are? Matthews must have contacts at the police station. Probably. But Clara, this is dangerous. Everything is dangerous now. At least this way I'm doing something instead of waiting for the axe to fall. By evening, Vivian had 3 names, all servants from different households, all with connections to families in Cordelia's social circle, all claiming to have seen Clara near Lady Pemberton's private rooms during the party. Clara started with the first name on the list, Sarah Mitchell, a lady's maid employed by the Thornbury household. She found the woman leaving the Thornbury townhouse just after 7, hurrying toward the servants' entrance of a building 2 streets over. "Miss Mitchell," Clara called out, stepping from the shadows where she'd been waiting. The woman jumped, spinning around with wide eyes. "Your Grace, I'm not here to threaten you. I just want to talk." Clara kept her voice gentle, non-threatening. "About what you told the police, about seeing me at this Pemberton estate." Sarah's face went pale. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do. You said you saw me near Lady Pemberton's rooms, but we both know that's not true because I was in the garden the entire time with my husband. So I'm curious, who paid you to lie?" "No one paid me to—" "Sarah." Clara stepped closer, softening her tone even more. "I know you're scared. I know someone put you up to this. Probably threatened you or your position if you didn't cooperate. But here's the thing, lying to the police is a crime, a serious one. And when this all comes out, and it will come out, you'll be the one facing charges while whoever paid you walks free." The woman's hands were shaking. "I could lose my position. My family needs this money." "I understand, and I'm not trying to take that away from you. I just need the truth. Who asked you to make that statement?" Sarah was silent for a long moment, clearly torn between fear and self-preservation. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Miss Ashford. She came to me 2 weeks ago, said she needed a favor, that it would be easy money. Just tell the police I saw you near those rooms. She paid me £50. Clara's heart hammered, but she kept her expression calm. "Did she say why?" "No. But she said if I didn't do it, she'd tell Lady Thornbury I'd been stealing. I haven't stolen anything. But who would believe me over her?" Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "I'm sorry. I know it was wrong, but I was scared." "I know." Clara pulled out a card with the townhouse address on it. "If anyone asks you about this conversation, tell them I threatened you. Make me the villain. But when the time comes to testify for real, I need you to tell the truth. Can you do that?" Sarah stared at the card, then nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Grace. 2 down, 1 to go." The pattern was the same. Servants offered money and threatened with consequences if they refused. All of them led back to Cordelia, though proving it would be harder. The woman had been careful not to put anything in writing, not to leave traces. But she'd made one mistake. She'd underestimated how much those servants valued self-preservation over loyalty to someone who'd coerced them. When Clara returned to the townhouse, she found Darian and Matthews in the study, surrounded by papers. "We have a problem," Darian said before she could share her discoveries. "Or possibly a breakthrough. Haven't decided yet." "What did you find?" Matthews pushed a ledger across the desk. "Cordelia's finances are a disaster. Debts to half of London's merchants, loans from 3 different banks, all secured against property her family no longer owns. She's been living on credit for 2 years. We already knew she needed money." "Yes, but look at the timing." Yes, Matthews pointed to a series of transactions. "She made a large payment to a private investigator 3 months before your wedding. £10,000, money she didn't have, borrowed against future expectations. And the investigator's specialty is digging up compromising information on people." Clara's mind raced. "She was investigating me before the wedding even happened, looking for ammunition." "Which means this wasn't a reaction to your marriage," Darian said quietly. "It was premeditated. She planned to destroy you from the beginning." The implication settled like ice in Clara's stomach. Every rumor, every public confrontation, every piece of scandal, all of it had been orchestrated before she'd even arrived at Wolf Manor. Cordelia hadn't been reacting to losing Darian. She'd been executing a plan to ensure Clara never became a permanent obstacle. "There's more," Matthews said. "The investigator's report included information about your father's debts, your family's financial collapse, even details about the marriage contract that should have been confidential. Someone with access to legal documents provided that information. Who? We're working on it, but the timing suggests someone in your father's legal team or possibly someone in this household. A traitor. Someone close enough to access private information, loyal enough to Cordelia to betray everything. The thought made Clara's skin crawl. Find them, she said. I don't care what it takes. Find out who sold us out. The Harrington ball was 2 days away when the next blow fell. Clara was reviewing household accounts, maintaining normalcy while their world burned, when Annie rushed in with a newspaper, her face stricken. Madam, you need to see this. The headline was worse than anything before. Duchess of Wolf connected to theft ring. The article detailed how Clara had allegedly been part of a sophisticated operation targeting wealthy households, using her new social position to gain access and steal jewelry. Lady Pemberton's robbery was just the latest in a string of thefts, all coincidentally occurring at events Clara had attended. It was brilliant in its construction, detailed enough to sound credible, vague enough to be hard to disprove, damaging enough to destroy her completely. This is a lie, Clara said, her voice deadly calm. Every word of this is fabricated. I know, madam, but people are believing it. There are already calls for your arrest. Darian appeared in the doorway, his own copy of the newspaper crumpled in his fist. Pack your things. We're leaving London. No. Clara, this has gone beyond reputation. If they arrest you, then they arrest me. But I'm not running. She stood, feeling something crystallize inside her. A decision, maybe, or just the final death of fear. Cordelia wants me to run, wants me to disappear so she can step in and comfort you through the scandal, but I'm done playing her game. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we destroy her at the Harrington ball, in front of everyone, publicly and completely. With what evidence? We have testimony from coerced servants and financial records that prove she's desperate but not criminal. That's not enough. Then we make it enough. Clara crossed to him, her mind already working through scenarios. The ball is the perfect stage. Everyone will be there. Society, politicians, the people whose opinions matter. If we can expose her there, if we can prove she orchestrated everything, the scandal becomes hers, not ours. That's an enormous risk. So is doing nothing. Vivian, who'd been listening from the hallway, stepped into the room. She's right. Running looks like guilt. But if you show up at that ball, united, and turn the tables on Cordelia in front of everyone, that's power. We don't have proof yet, Darian said. But Clara could hear the calculation in his voice. He was considering it. Then we find it in the next 2 days. Matthews keeps digging into the finances. I'll pressure the witnesses to give written statements, and we find the traitor who gave Cordelia access to our private information. Clara looked between them. It's risky, but it's our only move. Darian was silent for a long moment, weighing options the way he always did. Then, all right, we go to the ball. We make our stand. But if this fails, it won't fail. It can't. Because failure meant arrest, ruin, the complete destruction of everything she'd fought to build. The next 48 hours were a blur of desperate investigation. Matthews worked his contacts, tracing money and connections. Vivian extracted information from society contacts with surgical precision, and Clara coordinated it all, building a case piece by piece. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Annie knocked on Clara's door at midnight the night before the ball, looking terrified. Madam, there's someone here to see you, a Mr. Harrison. He says he has information about Miss Ashford. The man who entered the study was young, nervous, wearing a clerk's clothes and carrying a leather satchel. Your Grace, thank you for seeing me. Who are you? James Harrison. I work at Ashford & Sons, the legal firm that handled Miss Ashford's family affairs. He set the satchel on the desk. I'm here to give you these documents. They prove Miss Ashford has been embezzling from her own family's accounts to finance her campaign against you. Clara's hand shook as she opened the satchel. Inside were ledgers, bank statements, correspondence, a paper trail of theft and manipulation spanning months. Why are you giving me this? Because she's destroying my employer's reputation. The firm is being investigated for fraud because of her actions. And innocent people are going to lose their positions. Harrison's jaw tightened. I won't let her ruin more lives to save herself. Clara spent the rest of the night reading every document, cross-referencing with the information Matthews had gathered. By dawn, she had it, a complete picture of Cordelia's crimes, the embezzlement, the payoffs to false witnesses, the investigator hired to dig up dirt, even communication with a society columnist who'd been writing the damaging articles. And one more thing, a letter from someone in Wolf Manor's legal team dated 3 months before the wedding, containing detailed information about Clara's family finances and the marriage contract. The trader's name was revealed in the signature, Thomas Whitfield, a junior associate in the legal department Darian had trusted. He's been feeding her information since the beginning, Clara said when she showed Darian the evidence. Every private detail, every vulnerability. He sold us out for money she didn't even have. Darian's expression was carved from ice. Where's he now? Matthews has him in the library. Apparently he tried to flee when he realized we were investigating. They found Whitfield in the library, flanked by 2 of Darian's most loyal staff members, looking pale and defeated. Your Grace, I can explain. Don't. Darian's voice could have frozen fire. You betrayed this household for money, compromised confidential information, enabled someone to destroy my wife's reputation. There is no explanation that makes that acceptable. Miss Ashford said, she promised. I don't care what she promised. You're finished. I'll have you prosecuted for breach of confidentiality and whatever other charges my lawyers can devise. Darian leaned closer, his voice dropping to something dangerous. And then I'll make sure every legal firm in this empire knows exactly what you did. You'll never work again. Whitfield crumpled, all pretense of defiance evaporating. Please, I made a mistake. I needed the money and she was so convincing. Get him out of my sight, Darian said to the staff members. Turn him over to the police, file a formal complaint. After Whitfield was removed, still protesting weakly, Darian turned to Clara. We have everything, financial records, witness statements, proof of embezzlement and conspiracy. Enough to bury her. Then tomorrow night, Clara said, we end this. The Harrington Ball was the event of the season. Hundreds of guests, crystal chandeliers, an orchestra playing Strauss while London's elite danced and plotted and destroyed each other with practiced efficiency. Clara and Darian arrived late, making an entrance that stopped conversations mid-word. She wore deep crimson silk that had cost a fortune and looked like power-made fabric. Darian was in formal black, and together they looked like what they were, a united front walking into battle. The whispers started immediately. Clara could feel eyes following them, hear the speculation running through the crowd like electricity. There's the Duchess, the thief, the scandal. Look at them pretending everything's fine. Let them whisper. Let them judge. In an hour, they'd be singing a very different tune. They danced first, a statement of solidarity that couldn't be ignored. Darian held her closer than strictly necessary, and Clara let herself lean into him. Let the cameras and gossips capture every moment of manufactured intimacy that had somehow become less manufactured over the last few weeks. Are you ready for this? He murmured as they turned across the floor. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. Once we do this, there's no going back. We'll make enemies. We already have enemies. At least this way. Everyone will know who they are. Cordelia was watching from the edge of the ballroom, looking radiant in white silk, surrounded by admirers. When her eyes met Clara's across the dance floor, she smiled, triumphant, victorious, already tasting her win. She had no idea what was coming. When the dance ended, Darian guided Clara to the center of the room where Lord Harrington was preparing to make the traditional toast. Instead, Darian stepped forward. Lord Harrington, if I may, I have an announcement to make. The room quieted instantly. People turned, sensing something significant about to happen. As you all know, Darian began, his voice carrying across the ballroom. My wife has been the subject of vicious rumors and accusations over the past months. Theft, scandal, claims that our marriage is a sham. Clara could see Cordelia's smile widening, probably thinking he was about to announce their separation. Tonight, Darian continued, I want to address those rumors directly, because they're based on lies. Deliberate, calculated lies spread by someone with a personal agenda. The smile started to fade from Cordelia's face. "We have evidence," Darian said, and Matthews stepped forward with a leather portfolio, "that proves these accusations were orchestrated by Cordelia Ashford." The room erupted. Gasps, shocked murmurs, heads turning toward Cordelia, who had gone very pale. "This is absurd," she said, her voice sharp. "You can't possibly." "We have witness statements," Clara cut in, stepping forward beside Darian. "From the servants you paid to lie about seeing me at Lady Pemberton's estate. We have financial records showing you've been embezzling from your family to fund a campaign of character assassination. We have correspondence between you and a society columnist discussing how to craft the most damaging articles. And we have testimony," Darian added, "from a member of my legal staff whom you bribed to provide confidential information about my wife's family and our marriage contract." Cordelia's mask was cracking, fury and panic warring in her expression. "This is a fabrication. You're trying to destroy me because you know I'm telling the truth about your sham marriage." "The sham," Clara said coldly, "is your entire life. Your family's wealth, your social position, all of it built on credit and lies while you desperately tried to trap my husband into marriage to save yourself from financial ruin." She nodded to Matthews, who began distributing copies of the evidence to Lord Harrington, Lady Pemberton, and several other influential guests. Clara watched them read, watched comprehension dawn, watched the tide of opinion shift right there in the ballroom. "You framed me for theft," Clara continued, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "You paid witnesses to lie. You spread rumors designed to destroy my marriage and drive me out of London, all because you couldn't accept that Darian chose someone else." "I didn't choose you," Darian said, and Clara felt a flash of hurt before he continued. "My family's financial situation chose you. But you know what? I'm grateful it did. Because in the last few months, I've watched you transform from a frightened girl forced into marriage into one of the strongest, most capable women I've ever met. You've run my household better than anyone in a decade. You've faced down society's worst with grace and courage. And you've stood beside me through this entire nightmare without breaking." He turned to face the room, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "So let me be very clear. Clara Wolfe is my wife, my Duchess, my partner. And anyone who continues to spread these lies or question her integrity will answer to me personally." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Then Lord Harrington cleared his throat. "I've reviewed the evidence. It's quite compelling. Miss Ashford, I believe you have some serious questions to answer." "This is a conspiracy," Cordelia said, but her voice had lost its power. She looked around the room, searching for allies, finding only judgment. "You're all going to believe them? They've manufactured this evidence to discredit me. The evidence includes your own handwriting," Lady Pemberton said icily, holding up one of the documents. "Correspondence about my jewelry, about how stealing it would create the perfect scandal." Cordelia's face drained of color. She looked at Clara, at Darian, at the crowd of people who moments ago had been ready to believe the worst about the Duke and Duchess of Wolfe. Then she ran. She actually turned and fled the ballroom, pushing through the crowd, her white silk dress billowing behind her like a surrender flag. The room erupted into chaos, people shouting, demanding answers, clustered around the evidence like vultures at a carcass. Clara stood in the center of it all, Darian beside her, and felt something like victory settling in her bones. "We did it," she said quietly. "You did it," he corrected. "This was your plan, your investigation, your courage. We're allies, remember? We did this together." His hand found hers squeezing once, a gesture of solidarity that felt like something more. Partnership, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. The rest of the evening was a blur of apologies and reassessments. People who'd cut them dead for weeks suddenly couldn't apologize enough. Lady Thornbury actually cried while begging Clara's forgiveness. Lord Pemberton shook Darian's hand and promised full support in business matters. The tide hadn't just turned, it had reversed completely. By the time they left the ball, well past midnight, Clara was exhausted but exhilarated. They climbed into their carriage, and for the first time in months, she felt like she could actually breathe. "What happens now?" she asked. "To Cordelia?" "The police will investigate the theft charges. Her family's embezzlement will be exposed. She'll be ruined socially and probably criminally. Darian loosened his collar, looking as tired as she felt. She brought it on herself. I almost feel sorry for her. Almost. Don't. She would have destroyed you without hesitation. I know. Clara looked out at the darkened streets of London rolling past. I just wonder what made her so desperate, so willing to ruin lives to get what she wanted. Fear, probably, of being poor, of being powerless, of not mattering. He was quiet for a moment. I understand that more than I'd like to admit. The fear of losing everything. It makes people do terrible things. She turned to look at him, really look at him in the dim carriage light. Is that why you built all those walls? Fear of losing control? Maybe. Or maybe I just never learned how to be any other way. He met her eyes, and something passed between them. Honesty, vulnerability, the slow crumbling of defenses. But you've been showing me how to be strong without being cold, how to fight without losing your humanity, how to actually trust someone instead of just transacting with them. Clara's heart was hammering. Darian, I know what I said at the beginning, about this being a business arrangement, about not having time for romance or companionship. He shifted closer, his voice dropping. I was wrong. Or maybe I was lying to myself. Because somewhere in the last few months, you stopped being an obligation and became... He stopped, struggling with words that didn't come naturally to him. Someone I actually care about, someone I don't want to lose. You're not going to lose me. Promise? She smiled, feeling tears prick her eyes for the first time all night. I promise. We're allies, remember? That means we fight together, we survive together, we build something better together. He kissed her then, finally, after months of careful distance and manufactured intimacy. It wasn't like the wedding kiss, mechanical and brief. This was real, raw, full of everything they'd both been holding back. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Clara laughed shakily. Well, that was unexpected. Was it? We've been dancing around this for weeks. I thought you didn't do emotion. I'm learning. He pulled her closer, and she let herself lean into his warmth. You're a very good teacher.
Squishing my ad boys.
Chi. The carriage rolled through London toward home. Their home, together. And Clara thought about everything that had changed since that cold wedding day. She'd walked down the aisle alone, expecting nothing, preparing for a life of quiet desperation. Instead, she'd found power, purpose, partnership, and maybe, just maybe, something that looked a lot like love. The war wasn't over completely. Cordelia would face justice, society would gossip. There would be fallout and consequences and new battles to fight. But for the first time since she'd become Clara Wolfe, she wasn't fighting alone. They'd won the battle, together. And that made all the difference. The aftermath of the Harrington Ball hit London society like a detonation. By morning, every newspaper in the city carried the story, not about the scandalous Duchess of Wolfe, but about Cordelia Ashford's spectacular fall from grace. The evidence Clara and Darian had presented was too comprehensive, too damning to ignore. Embezzlement, bribery, conspiracy, theft. The charges mounted while Cordelia's world collapsed in real time. Clara woke late, tangled in silk sheets that smelled like Darian, because she'd fallen asleep in his bed, in his arms, after they'd stumbled home from the ball drunk on victory and possibility. The other side of the bed was empty now, but she could hear him moving around in the adjacent sitting room, probably already working despite the fact that it was barely 8 in the morning. Some things never changed. But when she padded out in her nightgown and robe, she found him not working but standing at the window with coffee, staring out at the rain-washed streets. "You're awake," he said without turning around. "So are you, though I had hoped you'd still be sleeping." "Too much to think about." He turned then, and the expression on his face was complicated, relief mixed with something darker. "The police arrested Cordelia an hour ago. Matthews just sent word. They're charging her with theft, fraud, and conspiracy to commit perjury." Clara sank into the nearest chair, the reality settling over her. It's really over. The criminal case is just beginning, but the social damage is done. She's finished in London. Probably finished everywhere. He moved to sit across from her. Her family's disowning her. Her friends have vanished. Within 24 hours, she went from society darling to complete pariah. Do you feel sorry for her? No? Should I? I don't know. I keep thinking about what you said last night, about fear making people do terrible things. She was desperate and cornered, and she lashed out. She tried to destroy you, to frame you for crimes you didn't commit, to take away everything we've built. Darian's voice was hard. Whatever drove her to it, the choices were hers. The consequences are earned. He was right, Clara knew, but some small part of her still felt the echo of that desperation, the fear of having nothing, being nothing, losing everything. She'd been there once, standing in Ashford House, while her father signed away her future to settle his debts. The difference was she'd chosen to fight instead of destroy. What happens now? She asked. With us, I mean. With everything. Darian set down his coffee cup, studying her with an intensity that made her skin warm. That depends on what you want. We could return to the original arrangement, separate lives, separate wings. The threat's gone, so there's no need to maintain the performance. Is that what last night was? A performance? No. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Last night was the first honest thing that's happened between us since we met. But I don't know what to do with honesty. I'm better with contracts and clear terms. He gestured between them. This is messy and complicated and nothing like what I planned. Plans change. Do they? Or do we just pretend they do while reverting to what's comfortable? Clara stood, moving to where he sat, refusing to let him retreat into safe distance. You want clear terms? Here are mine. I don't want to go back to being strangers who happen to share a name. I don't want separate wings and careful distance. I want to actually try being married, really married, not just legally bound. I don't know if I can give you what you're asking for. I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for effort, for presence instead of absence, for partnership instead of transaction. She crouched down so they were eye level. You showed me last night that you're capable of more than you think. Don't take it back in the morning light just because it's easier. He was silent for a long moment, and she watched the war happening behind his eyes, between the safety of isolation and the risk of connection. Finally, he reached out and pulled her into his lap, his arms coming around her with a fierceness that stole her breath. All right, he said against her hair. We try, but I'm going to be terrible at this. I'll work too much and forget to talk to you, and probably mess up in 1,000 ways I can't even predict. And I'll call you out when you do. That's what partners do. Partners, he repeated, testing the word. I like that better than allies. Good, because you're stuck with me now. His laugh was quiet but genuine. I think I can live with that. The next weeks unfolded like watching ice thaw after a brutal winter. Cordelia's trial became the scandal of the season, complete with breathless newspaper coverage and society matrons clutching their pearls over every sordid detail. The evidence was overwhelming. Witness testimony, financial records, even the stolen jewelry recovered from a pawn shop where Cordelia had tried to sell it for cash. Her defense crumbled under the weight of her own desperation. Clara attended the trial once, sitting in the gallery with Darian beside her, watching the woman who'd tried to destroy her face, the consequences of her choices. Cordelia looked diminished somehow, smaller, paler, stripped of the glittering armor of wealth and status that had made her formidable. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and Clara saw something there that might have been regret or might have been fury. Hard to tell. Either way, Cordelia looked away first. Do you need to hear the verdict? Darian asked quietly. No, I already know how this ends. They left before the jury returned because Clara found she didn't need the satisfaction of watching Cordelia's final downfall. She'd already won the only victory that mattered, her freedom, her reputation, her life. Everything else was just noise. Back at the townhouse, invitations flooded in. Not the hostile, trap-laden summons of before, but genuine requests for their company. People who'd cut them dead for months suddenly wanted the Duke and Duchess of Wolf at their dinner parties, their charity events, their society gatherings. The rehabilitation was swift and complete, society's fickle attention already moving to the next scandal. We should accept some of these, Darian said one evening, sorting through the pile. Make appearances, rebuild relationships. Do we have to? He looked up, surprised. You fought to be included in London society. Now you don't want to participate? I fought to not be destroyed by false accusations. That's different from actually wanting to spend every night making small talk with people who only care about us because we're useful. Clara set down the invitation she'd been reading. What if we just didn't? What if we went back to Wolf Manor and built a life there instead of constantly performing here? You hated Wolf Manor when we first married. I hated being isolated and powerless. But the house itself, the estate, there's potential there. We could actually make it a home instead of a museum. She warmed to the idea as she spoke. We could entertain, but on our terms. Invite people we actually like instead of obligatory society connections. Use the space for something meaningful instead of just maintaining appearances. Darian was quiet, considering. What about my work? The business requires me to be in London frequently. So, come to London when necessary, but live at the manor. Make it our base instead of this townhouse, where everything's about proximity to Parliament and society politics. That's not how things are done. Since when do we care about how things are done? Clara moved to sit beside him. We've broken every rule already. Why not this one too? She watched him think through it, weighing pros and cons the way he did everything. But then something shifted in his expression, a decision made not from calculation, but from actual desire. All right, he said. Let's go home. Returning to Wolf Manor felt different this time. The house was the same, imposing, cold, all dark stone and Gothic towers. But Clara saw it through new eyes now, not as a prison, but as a canvas, a place she could actually shape instead of just endure. Mrs. Vale met them at the entrance, her expression carefully neutral as always. Your Graces, we weren't expecting you back so soon. Plans changed, Darian said. We'll be staying indefinitely. Please gather the senior staff. We have some announcements. An hour later, the household assembled in the main hall, 32 people who'd been running this estate on autopilot for years, maintaining routines that no one questioned. Clara stood beside Darian and looked at the faces watching them with varying degrees of curiosity and concern. Time to shake things up. We're making changes, she began, starting with the staff structure. We're overstaffed in some areas and understaffed in others. Over the next month, we'll be restructuring positions to be more efficient and more equitable. She could see Mrs. Vale stiffen, probably preparing to object. But before the housekeeper could speak, Darian added, The Duchess has full authority over household operations. Her decisions are final. Anyone who has issues with that can find employment elsewhere. The message was clear. This wasn't a suggestion. This was the new order. Additionally, Clara continued, we'll be opening up parts of the manor that have been closed for years. The ballroom, the music room, the conservatory. This house was built to be lived in, and that's what we're going to do. And we'll be entertaining, Darian said, surprising even Clara with that announcement. Not constantly, but regularly. I want this estate to be a center of intelligent conversation and genuine hospitality, not a mausoleum. Isokiites. After the meeting, Mrs. Vale approached Clara with an expression somewhere between respect and resignation. Madam, these changes, they're quite dramatic. I know, but this house has been running on tradition and habit for too long. It's time to make it actually functional. And if the staff resist, then they can leave. I'm not forcing anyone to stay, but I am requiring anyone who stays to adapt. Clara softened her tone slightly. I know this is difficult. Change always is. But I'm not doing this to be cruel. I'm doing it because this place deserves to be more than a perfectly maintained shell. Mrs. Vale studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well, madam. I'll support the changes, though I reserve the right to complain about them. Clara smiled. I wouldn't expect anything less. The transformation of Wolf Manor took months, but it was worth every exhausting day. They started with the physical spaces, opening shuttered rooms, bringing in light, replacing heavy Victorian furniture with pieces that were beautiful and actually comfortable. Clara worked with architects and designers, but she made all the final decisions, refusing to delegate the soul of the house to someone else's vision. The ballroom became a space for actual entertainment, dinner parties, musical performances, gatherings of artists and intellectuals, instead of just stuffy society obligations. The music room was equipped with a proper piano and instruments for anyone who wanted to play. The conservatory was filled with plants and comfortable seating, becoming Clara's favorite retreat. Even Darian's study was transformed. He'd resisted at first, protective of his perfectly organized workspace. But Clara had worn him down, bringing in warmer lighting and better chairs and insisting he actually use the room for conversation instead of just solitary work. "This feels different," he said one evening, looking around at the changes. "Less like an office and more like, I don't know, a place where people actually exist." "That's the point. You've been treating this entire house like a business asset instead of a home. I didn't know the difference until you showed me." The household staff evolved too. Some left, unable or unwilling to adapt to the new expectations. But others thrived, discovering that they actually enjoyed working in a house that felt alive instead of preserved in amber. New people were hired, younger, more creative, more willing to challenge the old ways. Mrs. Vale remained, becoming Clara's unexpected ally in managing the chaos of transformation. They fought occasionally, disagreed frequently, but developed a grudging respect that turned into something almost like friendship. "You've done the impossible, madam," Mrs. Vale said one afternoon while they reviewed the updated household budget. "You've made this house feel like a home. I didn't think it could be done after the late Duke passed. It just needed someone willing to try, and someone willing to invest in it." Clara glanced toward the window where Darian was visible in the gardens below, actually taking a walk instead of working. "He's changing too, slowly, but definitely. Love does that to a person." Clara looked at the housekeeper sharply. "Who said anything about love?" Mrs. Vale's smile was knowing. "No one had to, madam. It's written all over both of you." Was it love? Clara wasn't entirely sure. It was something, this partnership they'd built from necessity and forged in fire. Something that looked like trust and felt like home and made her wake up grateful instead of resigned. If that was love, she'd take it. 6 months after the Harrington Ball, they hosted their first major event at Wolf Manor, a gathering of intellectuals, artists, business leaders, and politicians. Not because they were obligated to entertain them, but because Clara and Darian wanted interesting conversation and genuine connection. The evening was chaos in the best way. The ballroom filled with people who actually talked to each other instead of just performing. The music room hosted an impromptu concert. Someone started a debate about railway policy in the library that lasted 3 hours and generated actual ideas instead of just political posturing. Vivienne arrived late, swept in wearing dramatic burgundy, and immediately declared it the best party she'd been to in years. "You've actually done it. Made this place interesting instead of intimidating." "We tried," Clara said, watching Darian across the room in deep conversation with a group of investors about some new industrial project. He looked relaxed, engaged, almost happy. "More than tried. You've transformed him. He's actually present instead of just existing in his own head." Vivienne accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server. "I didn't think anyone could crack that armor. I'm impressed." "I didn't crack anything. He chose to lower the walls." "Because you made it safe to do so." "That's not nothing, Clara." Later, when the guests had gone and the house was quiet again, Clara found Darian in the library, looking at the portrait of his father that hung above the mantel. "Good party," he said, without turning around. He would have liked it. All these people, all this energy, it's what he wanted this place to be. Clara moved to stand beside him. "You miss him." "Every day, but especially tonight, showing that I finally figured out what he was trying to teach me." Darian's voice was quiet. "That life is meant to be lived, not just managed. That connection matters more than control. That letting people in doesn't make you weak. He'd be proud of you. Maybe, or maybe he'd say I took too long to learn the lesson." He turned to her, pulling her close. "But I'm grateful I figured it out eventually. Grateful I had you to show me. We showed each other. You taught me how to be strong. I taught you how to be human, fair trade." He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Very fair trade." They stood there in the library where Clara had first felt like this house might have some life in it, surrounded by books and memories and the weight of everything they'd survived. Outside, a storm was building. She could hear thunder in the distance, see lightning flickering through the windows. But inside, in this space they'd claimed and transformed together, everything felt solid, safe, real. The final piece of closure came unexpectedly, 3 weeks later. Clara was in her study reviewing correspondence when Annie announced a visitor. "There's a Miss Ashford here to see you, madam. She says it's important." Clara's heart stuttered. "Cordelia?" "No, madam, her sister, Miss Margaret Ashford." The woman who entered was older than Cordelia, dressed in simple but quality clothes, with the same striking features but none of the calculated charm. She looked tired and worried, and nothing like someone coming to cause trouble. "Mrs. Wolfe, thank you for seeing me. I know I have no right to ask for your time. What do you want?" Margaret Ashford twisted her gloves in her hands. "To apologize. For my sister. For everything she did to you and your husband. And to beg for your mercy." Clara studied her carefully. "Your sister was sentenced to 3 years in prison and social exile. What mercy is left to give?" "Financial mercy. Our family is ruined because of her debts and legal fees. We're going to lose everything, the house, the land, everything my father built before he squandered it gambling." Margaret's voice broke slightly. "I'm not asking you to forgive her crimes. Just, if there's any way you could influence the restitution demands, make them manageable instead of destroying what little we have left." It would be easy to say no, to let the Ashford family collapse completely, crushed under the weight of Cordelia's choices. Part of Clara wanted exactly that, wanted the satisfaction of knowing her enemy had lost everything. But that wasn't who she wanted to be, wasn't who she'd fought to become. "I'll speak to my husband," Clara said slowly. "We'll review the restitution terms. I'm not promising anything, but we'll consider restructuring to something your family can actually pay." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. You're far kinder than we deserve." "I'm not kind. I'm practical. Destroying your entire family doesn't actually benefit us. It just creates more suffering." Clara stood, signaling the meeting was over. "But understand this. If your sister ever comes near me or my husband again, if she ever tries anything remotely similar to what she did before, there will be no mercy. None. Are we clear?" "Perfectly clear. And she won't. The prison sentence broke her completely. Margaret swallowed hard. "She's not the woman she was. I don't know if she ever will be again." After Margaret left, Clara sat in her study for a long time, thinking about justice and mercy and the complicated space between them. When Darian came home from meetings in the village, she told him about the visit. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "Restructure the restitution to something manageable. Let them keep their home." The point was to stop Cordelia, not to destroy innocent family members. He nodded slowly. "All right, I'll have Matthews draw up new terms, but I want your name on the mercy clause. Let them know exactly who chose to help them." "Why?" "Because people should understand the kind of person you are. Strong enough to fight when threatened, secure enough to show mercy when you've won." He pulled her close. "That's power, Clara. Real power, not the kind Cordelia was chasing." The restructured restitution was delivered to the Ashford family the following week, and with it, a letter Clara had written carefully. To the Ashford family. The terms of restitution have been adjusted to reflect reality rather than punishment. You will repay the damages over 20 years at reasonable rates. Your family home is exempt from seizure. This mercy is not forgiveness. Your sister committed serious crimes that caused significant harm, but I see no purpose in punishing you for her choices. Use this second chance wisely. Build something better than what came before. Clara Wolfe, Duchess of Wolfe. The response came 2 days later. A short note from Margaret Ashford thanking her and promising the family would honor the new terms exactly. Cordelia sent nothing, but Clara hadn't expected her to. A year after that cold wedding day, Clara stood in the gardens of Wolfe Manor watching spring unfold in explosions of color and life. The estate had become everything she'd envisioned, a living, breathing place full of purpose and warmth instead of preserved perfection. Darian found her there, as he often did these days, taking breaks from work to actually exist in the world instead of just managing it from behind a desk. Matthews wants to know if we're attending the parliamentary session next month, he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Do we want to? Not particularly, but it might be necessary for the railway vote. Then we'll go. Stay a few days, handle business, come back home. She leaned into his warmth. That's the nice thing about having actual partnership. We can make these decisions together instead of you just disappearing for weeks. I'm still not perfect at this. The being present thing. No one's asking for perfect, just effort. She turned in his arms to face him. Besides, you're much better than you were. You actually eat dinner with me most nights now instead of working through it. Revolutionary. For you? Yes. He kissed her, slow and deep, and Clara felt the same spark of surprise and pleasure she always did when he lowered his guard completely. A year in, and she was still discovering new layers to the man she'd married. I love you, he said against her mouth, and her heart stuttered because he still didn't say it often, still treated the words like precious resources to be conserved. In case that wasn't clear. It's clear, but I like hearing it anyway. She smiled. I love you too, even when you're impossible and workaholic and emotionally constipated. Emotionally constipated? It's accurate. He laughed, pulling her closer. Fair enough. As long as you love me anyway. Always. They stood there in the garden while the world turned around them, the estate thriving, the household humming with life, the future stretching out with possibility instead of dread. Clara thought about the girl who'd walked down the aisle expecting nothing, preparing for a life of quiet desperation in a loveless marriage. She hadn't known then what she was capable of. Hadn't known she could fight and survive and build something real from the ruins of a transaction. But she knew now. Do you ever regret it? Darian asked quietly. The marriage. The way it started. Everything you had to survive to get here. Clara considered the question seriously. A year ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. But now, standing in gardens she'd helped plant, in an estate she'd transformed with a man she'd somehow actually fallen in love with. No, she said. I don't regret it, because it brought me here, to this life, to you, to becoming someone I actually respect instead of someone just surviving. That's a good answer. I thought so. Somewhere in London, society was probably inventing new scandals to whisper about. Somewhere, people were still playing the same games of power and manipulation that had nearly destroyed Clara. The world kept turning, kept churning out the same patterns. But here, in this corner of the empire they'd claimed and defended and made their own, Clara and Darian had built something different. Something that had started as obligation and transformed into partnership. Something that had survived fire and emerged stronger. Not perfect. Never perfect. But real and earned and entirely theirs. Come on, Clara said, taking his hand. Mrs. Vale wants to discuss plans for the summer garden party. Apparently, we're expected to host half the county. Do we have to? We don't have to do anything, but we could. Make it interesting instead of tedious. Invite people we actually want to see. Revolutionary. That's our specialty now, being revolutionary. She pulled him toward the house, toward their life, toward everything they'd built from the ashes of a cold transaction. Let's go plan something spectacular. They walked back through gardens blooming with new life, into a house that finally felt like home, ready to face whatever came next. Together. Always together. And somewhere above them, if the dead could see such things, maybe Darian's father was smiling, watching his son finally learn the lesson he'd been trying to teach. That power means nothing without connection. Success means nothing without joy. And sometimes the best things in life come from the unexpected places. Like a marriage forged like a contract that became something infinitely more valuable. Like two people who learned to be partners when they'd only planned to be strangers. Like love found in the ruins of an arrangement, blooming wild and fierce and completely unstoppable. The Iron Duchess and the Duke who learned to thaw. Not a fairy tale, but something better. A true story of survival, transformation, and the power of refusing to disappear. Their story. Hard-won and entirely real. And it was only just beginning.